Sir, my mother has a tattoo just like yours. The words fell like a grenade into the crystal silence of Manhattan's most exclusive dining room. Sophie Carter's hand trembled as she held the champagne bottle, her eyes locked on the compass rose tattoo circling the wrist of billionaire Alexander Hunt. 25 years of questions, 25 years of watching her mother trace that same mark on her own skin while whispering about a love that destroyed her. All of it collided in this impossible moment. The table of Wall Street titans froze. Alexander's face drained of color, and Sophie knew, with terrible certainty, that her life was about to shatter into truth. Stay with me until the end of this story. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The alarm screamed at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Sophie Carter needed it to. She'd been awake for an hour already, staring at the water-stained ceiling of the Washington Heights apartment, listening to her mother's breathing through the thin wall that separated their bedrooms. Each breath came with effort now, a wet rattle that Sophie had learned to measure like a countdown clock. Better than yesterday. Worse than last week. No pattern except decline. Sophie silenced her phone and sat up in the narrow bed, her feet finding the cold floor in the pre-dawn darkness. The radiator had died again sometime during the night. She could see her breath in the November chill, could feel the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into her bones before the day even began. 25 years old, and she couldn't remember the last morning she'd woken without dread. Through the wall, her mother coughed, a deep rattling sound that seemed to tear something loose inside her chest. Sophie was on her feet and moving before the sound finished, crossing the cramped living room in 4 steps, pushing open the bedroom door that never quite closed properly. "Mama?" Elena Carter was sitting up in bed, one hand pressed to her chest, the other clutching the threadbare comforter Sophie had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. In the dim light from the street, Sophie could see the sheen of sweat on her mother's dark skin, could see the way her shoulders hunched with each labored breath. "I'm okay, baby." Elena's voice came out thin and reedy, nothing like the strong contralto that used to fill their old house with singing. "Just a bad night. Go get ready for work." Sophie crossed to the bed and sat on the edge, pressing her hand to her mother's forehead. Warm, but not burning. The fever that had spiked last week seemed to have broken, at least. Small mercies in a cascade of losses. "You need to see a doctor, Mama. A real one, not the clinic that makes you wait 6 hours to tell you to rest and drink water." Elena shook her head, the motion making her wince. "We can't afford real doctors, Sophie. You know that. The clinic is fine. You need tests. You need someone to figure out why you can't breathe, why you're exhausted all the time, why you're losing weight, even though I'm forcing food down your throat every chance I get." Sophie heard her voice rising and forced herself to take a breath, to soften the edge of panic that wanted to cut through every word. "Please, Mama, let me take you to the emergency room. They have to treat you. They can't turn you away." "And then what?" Elena's eyes, still sharp despite the illness eating through her body, locked onto Sophie's face. "They treat me. They run their tests. They find whatever's wrong. And then they hand us a bill that costs more than we'll make in 5 years. Then what, baby? You already work yourself to death keeping us afloat. You think I don't see you limping home at midnight after double shifts? You think I don't know you gave up your scholarship, your whole future, to take care of me? Don't." Sophie's throat tightened. They'd had this argument 100 times, and it never changed anything. That was my choice. It was my failure. Elena reached out and took Sophie's hand, her grip weak but insistent. Her fingers found the familiar gesture they'd repeated 1,000 times, tracing the veins on the back of Sophie's hand in a pattern that soothed them both. "I should have done better, should have given you better, should have." She broke off coughing again, her whole body shaking with the force of it. Sophie grabbed the water glass from the nightstand and held it to her mother's lips, supporting her shoulders until the fit passed. When Elena could breathe again, she pulled her hand back and pushed up the sleeve of her nightgown. The compass rose tattoo circled her left wrist, faded now but still visible. A nautical star with 8 points, each one perfectly symmetrical, rendered in dark ink that had blurred slightly over the years. Elena touched it with her right hand, the gesture unconscious and automatic. "This was supposed to mean something," Elena whispered, more to herself than to Sophie. "He said it meant we'd always find our way back to each other. He said a compass rose never lies. It always points true north. Sophie had heard the story fragments before, scattered across her childhood like puzzle pieces that never quite fit together. A man her mother had loved in college. A relationship that ended in pain. A tattoo they'd gotten together during one perfect summer before everything fell apart. Her mother rarely spoke about him anymore, but sometimes, in moments of weakness or fever, the old wound would open again. "Mama." He lied. Elena's voice had gone flat, emotionless, in that particular way that meant the emotion underneath was too big to express. The tattoo lied. He lied. Men with money and power lie because they can afford to, because there are no consequences for them, only for people like us. She pulled her sleeve back down and lay back against the pillows, suddenly exhausted. "Go to work, Sophie. We need the money. I'll be fine. I'm always fine." But she wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Sophie stood slowly, her back protesting the movement. She'd pulled something during last night's shift, carrying a tray loaded with champagne bottles to a group of hedge fund managers celebrating a merger. They'd tipped well, at least. $200 on a $3,000 tab. Generous by most standards, a rounding error in their world. "I love you, Mama. I love you more, baby girl. Now go." "And Sophie?" Elena's eyes opened again, focusing with effort. "Whatever happens, you're the best thing I ever did. The only thing I got right." Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice, and left the room. She showered in 3 minutes flat, using water that never quite got hot enough, dressed in the black slacks and white button-down shirt that served as her uniform, and made 2 peanut butter sandwiches, one for her mother to find for lunch, one for herself to eat on the train. The sun was just starting to color the eastern sky as Sophie locked the apartment door and hurried down 4 flights of stairs. Their building had an elevator, but it had been broken for 6 months. The superintendent kept promising it would be fixed next week, but next week never seemed to come. Sophie had stopped asking. The subway platform was already crowded with the city's early risers, janitors and construction workers, nurses finishing night shifts and bakers heading to start the morning bread. Sophie found her usual spot near the 3rd support column and pulled out her phone to check the balance in her bank account. $243. Rent was due in 5 days. They needed groceries. Her mother's medication cost $60, even at the discount pharmacy. The electric bill was already overdue by 2 weeks. Sophie closed the banking app and opened her text messages instead. 3 messages from Maya, her only real friend from the scholarship program she'd abandoned 3 years ago. "Girl, you still alive? Haven't heard from you in forever. Seriously, Soph, I'm worried. Call me. I got promoted to associate. Whole team's going out Friday to celebrate. Please come? I miss your face." Sophie stared at the messages, feeling the familiar wash of shame and longing. Maya had finished law school, passed the bar on her first try, and was now working her way up at one of Manhattan's top firms. She was exactly where Sophie should have been, where she would have been, if her mother hadn't gotten sick, if the medical bills hadn't piled up, if Sophie hadn't made the choice between her future and her mother's life. She typed out a response. "So proud of you. Slammed with work this week, but let's catch up soon. Love you." The lies came easily now. It was easier than explaining that she couldn't afford the train fare to wherever Maya's team was celebrating, couldn't afford the drinks, couldn't bear to sit across from her old friend and pretend that serving food to rich people was what she'd always dreamed of doing. The train rattled into the station, and Sophie pushed into the crowded car. She had 40 minutes to get from Washington Heights to Midtown, 15 minutes to change in the staff locker room, and then a double shift that would run until at least 11 p.m. If she was lucky, she'd make $300 in tips. If she was very lucky, she'd get home before midnight, and her mother would be asleep, and Sophie wouldn't have to pretend that everything was fine. The train lurched forward, and Sophie grabbed a pole to steady herself. Around her, the city's forgotten workers swayed in unison, all of them heading toward jobs that ground them down day after day, all of them holding on with whatever strength they had left. Lumiere was the kind of restaurant that existed in a different universe than the one Sophie actually inhabited. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across white tablecloths, hand-embroidered in France. The silverware was actual silver, heavy and ornate. The wine list started at $300 a bottle and climbed into the thousands. The clientele wore watches that cost more than Sophie's mother's medical bills, and they barely glanced at the servers who catered to their every whim. Sophie had been working at Lumiere for 2 years, ever since the upscale bistro where she'd worked before had closed suddenly, leaving her scrambling for anything that would cover the bills. Lumiere paid better than most, the tips alone could be astronomical, but it came at a cost. The management expected perfection. The clientele expected invisibility until they needed something, and then instantaneous service. One mistake could get you fired. 2 complaints could get you blacklisted from every high-end restaurant in Manhattan. Sophie, you're on VIP section tonight. Marcus, the floor manager, caught her as she emerged from the locker room. He was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who'd spent 30 years working his way up from busboy to management. He treated the restaurant's wealthy patrons with obsequious reverence and the staff with casual contempt. Alexander Hunt is hosting a private celebration in the Astor room. 8 guests. They're pre-ordering the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings. This is a $15,000 table minimum, so don't screw it up. Sophie's stomach tightened. The Astor room was Lumiere's most exclusive space, a private dining room with oak paneling and a view of Central Park South. Service there required absolute precision. It also meant that she'd be effectively trapped for the next 4 hours, unable to check her phone, unable to step away if her mother needed her. Marcus, You what? He turned to face her fully, his expression hardening. You have a problem with the assignment? Because we have 5 other servers who would kill to work VIP tonight. The tips alone will be $2,000, maybe $3,000. But if you're not interested, I can call someone else in. Sophie swallowed the protest. She couldn't afford to lose this opportunity, and Marcus knew it. That was how places like Lumiere operated. They dangled the possibility of real money in front of people desperate enough to accept any conditions, any humiliation, for a chance at something better than survival. No problem. Thank you for the opportunity. Good. Marcus handed her a leather-bound folder. Table details. Mr. Hunt's assistant called ahead with dietary restrictions and seating arrangements. He wants everything perfect. The man's worth $8 billion, Sophie. $8 billion. You smile, you serve, you disappear. Understood? Understood. Sophie took the folder and headed toward the Astor room. The restaurant's main dining area was already filling with the dinner crowd. Business executives entertaining clients. Wealthy couples celebrating anniversaries. Groups of friends who thought nothing of dropping $500 per person on a meal. The noise level rose with each arrival, a symphony of privilege composed of laughter and clinking glasses and the murmur of deals being made. The Astor room stood apart from the chaos, separated by a heavy mahogany door and a hallway lined with photographs of the restaurant's famous patrons over the decades. Sophie paused outside the door to collect herself, reviewing the details Marcus had provided. Alexander Hunt, 48 years old, founder and CEO of Hunt Global Ventures, a private equity firm that controlled billions in assets across technology, real estate, and healthcare. Princeton undergrad, Harvard MBA. Married once, divorced 12 years ago, no children, no. Known for ruthless business acumen and a personal life kept meticulously private. The guest list read like a Fortune 500 directory. Executives, hedge fund managers, a prominent senator, and Hunt's chief counsel. They were celebrating the close of a major acquisition, something involving a pharmaceutical company and regulatory approval. The details didn't matter to Sophie. What mattered was performing her role flawlessly enough to earn a tip that might buy her mother another month of medication. She opened the door and stepped into the Astor room. The space was intimate, dominated by a long table set for 9. Crystals sparkled under the chandelier. The pre-ordered wine bottles, Sophie counted 6 of them, each costing more than her monthly rent, stood breathing on a sideboard. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows showed Central Park draped in November darkness, the lights of the city reflected in the reservoir like fallen stars. The guests hadn't arrived yet. Sophie had 20 minutes to ensure everything was perfect. Water glasses filled, silverware aligned, every detail precisely as the exacting standards of Lumiere demanded. She worked quickly, her movements automatic after 2 years of practice. Check the table settings, verify the wine selection against the order, adjust the lighting to create the appropriate ambiance, disappear before the guests arrived, ready to materialize instantly when needed. She was finishing when she heard voices in the hallway, male, confident, the easy laughter of men who'd never questioned their place in the world. Sophie positioned herself by the sideboard, hands clasped in front of her, face arranged in the pleasant, neutral expression that wealth expected from service workers. Smile enough to seem friendly, not enough to seem familiar. The door opened, and Alexander Hunt walked in. Sophie had seen photographs, of course. The business press loved him, the self-made billionaire who'd turned a small inheritance into an empire, the genius investor who could spot value where others saw risk. But photographs hadn't captured the physical presence of the man. He stood 6'2", lean and athletic despite approaching 50. His dark hair was graying at the temples in a way that looked distinguished rather than old. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $10,000, tailored perfectly to his frame. His eyes were blue, sharp, and assessing, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came his guests, a parade of power dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. They filled the room with their presence, their voices, their assumption that the world existed to serve them. Sophie faded into the background, becoming invisible as she'd learned to do, waiting for the moment when she'd be needed. "Gentlemen, Diane, please sit." Alexander Hunt's voice carried authority effortlessly. He didn't need to raise it. People listened because not listening was unthinkable. "We have much to celebrate tonight. The Meridian acquisition is complete, which means Hunt Global now controls 60% of the generic pharmaceutical market in the Midwest. To those who said it couldn't be done, to those who bet against us," he paused, his smile sharp as a blade. "I hope you enjoyed losing your money." The table erupted in laughter. Sophie moved forward to pour water, starting from the left as she'd been trained, making her way around the table. The guests barely registered her presence, already deep in conversation about stock prices and market share and the beautiful mathematics of leveraged buyouts. She reached Alexander Hunt's chair and leaned in to fill his glass. That's when she saw it. The tattoo. It circled his left wrist, just visible where his tailored shirt cuff had pulled back slightly. A compass rose, 8-pointed, rendered in dark ink that had faded slightly over time, identical in every detail to the tattoo her mother had worn for 25 years. Sophie's hand trembled. Water splashed over the rim of the glass, spotting the white tablecloth. She jerked back, horrified, trying to recover, but her eyes stayed locked on that tattoo. The same design, the same placement, the same... "Are you all right?" Alexander Hunt's voice cut through her shock. He was looking at her now, really looking at her for the first time, his sharp blue eyes taking in her face with the same assessing intensity he probably brought to business deals. Yes, sir, I apologize. I'll get a fresh napkin." But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. He said it meant we'd always find our way back to each other. He said a compass rose never lies. "Young lady?" One of the other guests, a silver-haired man with jowls like a bulldog, leaned forward. "Is there a problem?" Sophie shook herself free of the paralysis. This was insane. Thousands of people had compass rose tattoos. It meant nothing. It was a coincidence, a trick of memory and exhaustion and the stress of watching her mother die by inches. "No problem, sir. Again, my apologies." She set down the water pitcher and hurried toward the sideboard, needing distance, needing to think. But her mind was reeling. The tattoo. The age. Her mother had been in college 26 years ago, had fallen in love with someone rich and powerful, someone who'd gotten the same tattoo during a summer that meant everything until it meant nothing. Behind her, the conversation had resumed. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand. First course in 10 minutes. She needed to coordinate with the kitchen, needed to ensure the wine was poured at precisely the right moment, needed to be perfect because anything less than perfect meant disaster. But when she turned back to the table, her eyes found Alexander Hunt's wrist again. He'd pulled his cuff down, covering the tattoo, but Sophie's hands were shaking as she lifted the first bottle of wine. "Get through the service, make the tips, go home, check on Mama." Forget about the impossible coincidence that had just turned her world inside out. Except she couldn't forget. Because as she moved around the table, as she performed her role with mechanical precision, she kept calculating the timeline. Her mother had been 23 when she'd gotten pregnant. The man had been in business school. Princeton undergrad, her mother had said once, in a moment of wine-loosened memory. Harvard for graduate school. Princeton. Harvard. Business school. the right age. No, impossible. The world wasn't that small. Fate wasn't that cruel. The first course arrived, seared diver scallops with cauliflower puree and caviar. Sophie placed each plate with perfect precision, her movements automatic. The guests barely paused their conversation. Money was being discussed. Always money. Billions and millions reduced to abstract numbers. To toys, these people moved around on spreadsheets while the rest of the world drowned in medical bills and overdue rent. The key is timing, Alexander Hunt was saying. The FDA approval gives us a 3-year window before the patents expire. We maximize production, flood the market, capture market share. By the time the patents run out, we'll have established enough brand loyalty to weather the generic competition. He took a bite of scallop, chewed thoughtfully, nodded his approval. And we'll have made approximately $4 billion in profit. Not a bad return on our 18-month investment. What about the people who can't afford the medications now? The question came from the woman at the table, Diane something, the senator. The acquisition has already driven prices up 30%. My office is getting calls from constituents who are rationing insulin, who are choosing between their medications and their rent. Alexander Hunt's expression didn't change. That's not a business problem, Diane. That's a policy problem. If you want pharmaceutical companies to lower prices, change the laws. Until then, we operate in the framework that exists. Hunt Global has a fiduciary duty to our investors to maximize returns. Sentimentality doesn't factor into that equation. Sophie's hand tightened on the wine bottle. She thought of her mother, rationing her medication because they couldn't afford the full prescriptions. She thought of the clinic waiting room, full of people choosing between their health and their survival. And here sat a man worth $8 billion, calmly explaining why human suffering was merely a policy problem. She poured the wine and said nothing. Because what could she say? She was a waitress. He was a billionaire. Her voice didn't matter in rooms like this. The dinner continued through 7 courses, each one more elaborate than the last. Sophie moved through her role like an automaton, her mind churning with impossible mathematics. The tattoo, the timeline, the way Alexander Hunt's eyes were blue, the exact shade of blue she saw in the mirror every morning when she looked at her own reflection. No, she was being ridiculous. Exhaustion and stress were making her see connections that didn't exist. Tomorrow she'd laugh about this, about the moment she'd convinced herself that a billionaire dining in the restaurant where she worked might somehow be connected to her mother's past. Except she couldn't shake it. The coincidence was too perfect, and Sophie had learned over 25 years of watching her mother's careful silences that the things people didn't talk about were often the truest things of all. The final course arrived, a deconstructed tiramisu with gold leaf and espresso caviar. Sophie placed each dessert with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Just one more hour, and she could collect her tips and leave and never think about Alexander Hunt's compass rose tattoo again. Magnificent meal, the bulldog-faced man announced, dabbing his lips with his napkin. Alexander, you always did have impeccable taste. In restaurants, certainly. Alexander Hunt leaned back in his chair, cradling a glass of dessert wine. The light caught his wrist as he lifted the glass, and the compass rose tattoo was visible again, stark against his skin. In other aspects of life, my judgment has been less reliable. Oh? Another guest, a younger man with slicked back hair and a tie that probably cost more than Sophie's entire wardrobe, leaned forward with interest. Do tell. I didn't think Alexander Hunt was capable of mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, James. The key is learning from them before they become catastrophic. Alexander's voice had gone distant, almost melancholic. He touched his wrist, his fingers tracing the compass rose tattoo in a gesture that was unconscious and automatic. I made mine a long time ago. Sometimes I think I'm still paying for it. Sophie froze in the act of refilling water glasses. She stood 3 feet from Alexander Hunt's chair, close enough to see the sadness that had flickered across his face, close enough to see him trace that tattoo the exact same way her mother did on nights when the past became too heavy to carry. The exact same way. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her vision tunneled. And before she could stop herself, before sanity or professional survival could override the question that had been building for the past 4 hours, Sophie heard her own voice cut through the comfortable murmur of conversation. "Sir?" The table fell silent. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her, most annoyed at the interruption, 1 or 2 curious about what a server could possibly have to say. Alexander Hunt looked up at her, his expression polite but distant, still lost in whatever memory had darkened his mood. Sophie's mouth was dry. Her hands were shaking again. Every professional instinct screamed at her to stop, to apologize, to fade back into invisibility before she destroyed the only job keeping her mother alive. But the words came anyway, propelled by 25 years of questions and the impossible coincidence of that tattoo. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The silence that followed her words was absolute. Someone's fork clinked against their plate. Somewhere in the main dining room, laughter floated through the heavy mahogany door. But in the Astor room, 8 people stared at Sophie like she'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Alexander Hunt's face had gone completely still. "I'm sorry?" The compass rose. Sophie pointed at his wrist with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. "On your wrist. My mother has the same one. Same design, same placement. She got it 26 years ago with someone she loved. Someone who told her it meant they'd always find each other again." The bulldog-faced man's expression curdled into contempt. "Young lady, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is highly inappropriate. We're in the middle of a private celebration." "Robert, wait." Alexander Hunt raised one hand, silencing his colleague. His eyes hadn't left Sophie's face. The distance in them had evaporated, replaced by something sharp and searching and utterly focused. "What's your mother's name?" Sophie's throat had closed. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into nothing. Once she said the name, there would be no taking it back. No returning to the careful fiction that her life was separate from the glittering world of people like Alexander Hunt. "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Carter." The color drained from Alexander Hunt's face. The wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the edge of the table, sending burgundy liquid cascading across the white tablecloth. He stood so abruptly that his chair toppled backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. "That's impossible." His voice came out raw, stripped of all the smooth authority he'd wielded throughout dinner. "Elena died. The baby, there was no baby. She miscarried. She told me—" He broke off, one hand going to his wrist, his fingers digging into the compass rose tattoo hard enough to leave marks. "When?" "When what?" Sophie heard herself say. "When were you born?" "What's your birthday?" "March 17th. The words felt like they were coming from someone else's mouth. "March 17th, 2000. I'm 25 years old." Alexander Hunt stared at her, his sharp blue eyes, the exact shade of blue Sophie saw in the mirror every morning, wide with shock. The mathematics were simple, undeniable. 25 years ago, Elena Carter had been pregnant. 25 years ago, she told Alexander Hunt the baby was gone. And now Sophie stood in front of him, wearing his eyes in her face, asking questions that could only have one answer. "Elena's alive?" Alexander's voice cracked on her mother's name. "And she had... You're saying she had the baby? That she..." He seemed unable to finish the sentence, unable to speak the impossible truth out loud. The room had erupted into chaos. The other guests were on their feet, demanding explanations, trying to restore order to a situation that had spun completely out of control. The bulldog-faced man was shouting something about calling security. The senator was staring at Sophie with calculating eyes. And Sophie herself felt frozen in place, watching Alexander Hunt's world disintegrate in real time. "I think," Sophie said slowly, each word feeling like it might shatter her, "I think you need to meet my mother." The words hung in the air between them like smoke after an explosion. Alexander Hunt stood motionless, his hand still gripping his wrist where the compass rose, tattoo burned beneath his fingers. Sophie watched emotions cascade across his face, shock bleeding into disbelief, disbelief hardening into something that looked like anger or maybe terror. She couldn't tell which. She'd never seen a billionaire's carefully constructed mask crack open before. "This is insane." Robert, the bulldog-faced man, was the first to recover his voice. He rounded on Sophie with the full force of his outrage, his jowls quivering. Young lady, I don't know what kind of scheme you're trying to pull here, but it ends now. You're obviously after money, trying to shake down Mr. Hunt with some ridiculous story about your mother and a tattoo. Security needs to remove you immediately before— Robert, shut up. Alexander's voice cut through the tirade like a knife through silk. He hadn't looked away from Sophie, hadn't blinked, his blue eyes boring into hers, as if he could extract the truth through sheer force of will. Everyone needs to leave, now. Alexander, you can't be serious. The senator, Diane, stepped forward, her expression carefully controlled but her voice tight with concern. This woman is clearly unstable. She's interrupted a private dinner to make wild accusations. Let security handle this and we can— I said everyone leaves. Alexander's tone brooked no argument. This conversation is private. The celebration is over. Send my apologies to the kitchen and tell Marcus to charge everything to my account, including a 30% gratuity for the staff. He finally tore his gaze away from Sophie to sweep it across his guests. And if anyone breathes a word about what just happened in this room, I will personally ensure that your involvement in every deal, every investment, every business relationship you have becomes a liability you can't afford. Are we clear? The silence that followed was glacial. Sophie watched the powerful people who'd spent the evening discussing billions of dollars like pocket change suddenly transform into school children being dismissed by a strict teacher. They gathered their belongings in tense silence, shooting glances at Sophie that ranged from curious to contemptuous. Robert looked like he wanted to say something else, but one look at Alexander's face stopped him cold. The senator was the last to leave. She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. Alexander, be careful. Whatever this is, whatever you think you're dealing with, be careful. People like this, they smell money, and they come with stories designed to exploit your vulnerabilities. Noted. Goodbye, Diane. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Sophie and Alexander stood on opposite sides of the ruined table, the spilled wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood, the remnants of the $15,000 dinner forgotten in the wake of the bombshell that had just detonated their separate worlds. Alexander moved first. He righted his fallen chair and sank into it, his movements suddenly heavy, as if the shock had added years to his frame in the span of minutes. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, please. Sophie's legs felt like water, but she managed to cross the room and lower herself into the indicated chair. Up close, she could see the fine lines around Alexander's eyes, could see the way his hands trembled slightly as he pressed them flat against the table. He looked like a man who'd just watched his entire understanding of reality collapse. Tell me everything. His voice was hoarse. Start from the beginning. Your mother's name is Elena Carter. She's alive. She has a daughter, you, born March 17th, 2000. He paused, doing the mathematics in his head. Which means she got pregnant in the summer of 1999. Which means— He closed his eyes. I need you to tell me everything. Sophie's mouth was dry. She dreamed of this moment in 1,000 different ways over the years. The moment when the mystery of her father's identity would finally be solved. She'd imagined tears and reunion, imagined anger and rejection, imagined everything except sitting in a restaurant's private dining room, watching a billionaire struggle to process information that was rewriting his past. I don't know everything, Sophie said carefully. My mother never told me much. She said she fell in love with someone in college, someone from a wealthy family. They got matching tattoos one summer, compass roses, because he told her it meant they'd always find their way back to each other. Then she got pregnant, and everything fell apart. She told me he offered her money to end the pregnancy, that his family saw her as a problem to be solved. She refused the money and cut off contact. She told him the baby was gone, that she'd miscarried because she couldn't stand the thought of him being in our lives out of obligation rather than love. Alexander's face had gone gray. She told me she miscarried 3 months after we'd ended things. She called me, told me she'd been pregnant, but it was over now, that I didn't need to worry about it anymore. I believed her. His voice broke. I sent her flowers and a card saying I was sorry for her loss. I thought that was the end of it. It was the end for you. Sophie heard the bitterness in her own voice and couldn't quite suppress it. For my mother, It was the beginning of 25 years of raising a daughter alone, working 3 jobs to keep us fed, sacrificing everything she could have been so I could have a chance at something better. And now she's dying because she worked herself into the ground, and we can't afford the medical care that might save her. The word dying hit Alexander like a physical blow. He flinched, his hands curling into fists against the tablecloth. Elena's dying. She can't breathe. She's losing weight even though I force her to eat. She has fevers that come and go, night sweats, exhaustion that keeps her in bed for days at a time. We go to the free clinic in Washington Heights, and they tell her to rest and drink water, but it's getting worse. She needs real tests, real doctors, a real hospital, but we don't have insurance and we can't afford the bills, so she's just... Sophie's throat tightened. She's just fading away. Alexander Hunt, billionaire titan of industry, put his face in his hands. Sophie watched his shoulders shake and realized with shock that he was crying. Silent, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear through his chest. When he finally looked up, his blue eyes were red-rimmed and devastated. I offered her $50,000 to end the pregnancy, he said, each word falling like stones into dark water. My father told me it was the smart thing to do, that I couldn't let a summer fling derail my future. I was 23 years old, about to start business school, engaged to merge my family's wealth with another dynasty. Elena was a scholarship student from nowhere, someone who didn't fit into the world I was supposed to inhabit. So I took my father's advice and I offered her money to make the problem go away. He laughed bitterly. She threw it in my face. Literally, she threw the check at me and told me that if I thought a human life could be solved with money, then I wasn't the man she'd fallen in love with. She was right. Sophie sat frozen, watching this powerful man dismantle himself in front of her. Part of her wanted to comfort him, to ease the obvious agony he was experiencing. But another part, the part that had watched her mother struggle for 25 years, the part that had given up her own future to keep them both afloat, remained cold and distant. When she called to say she'd miscarried, I was relieved. Alexander's voice had gone flat, confessional. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth. I was relieved that the problem had solved itself, that I could move forward with my life without the complication of a child with a woman my family would never accept. I married Vanessa 6 months later, a merger dressed up as a marriage, exactly what my father wanted. We divorced 12 years ago when she finally got tired of being married to someone who was married to his work. No children. We'd agreed early on that children didn't fit our lifestyle. He met Sophie's eyes. I convinced myself I didn't want children because it was easier than admitting I'd already had one and thrown that chance away. You didn't throw me away, Sophie heard herself say. You didn't know I existed. My mother made sure of that. Because I gave her every reason to believe I'd be a liability rather than an asset. Alexander pushed back from the table and stood, pacing to the window to stare out at Central Park. I need to see her. Elena, I don't even know what I need. To apologize? To make amends? To verify that this is real and not some fever dream? He turned back to Sophie. You look like her, you know. You have her mouth, her chin, but your eyes touched his own face. Those are mine. Sophie felt something crack open inside her chest. All her life, she'd looked in the mirror and wondered about the parts of herself that didn't come from her mother. Now she had her answer, standing across the room in a $10,000 suit, looking at her with a mixture of wonder and devastation. She won't want to see you, Sophie said quietly. She spent 25 years trying to forget you existed. When she talks about you at all, which is almost never, there's nothing but pain in her voice. You broke something in her that never healed. Then I owe her more than apologies. I owe her 25 years of support, 25 years of being a father to you, 25 years of... Alexander cut himself off, seeming to realize the futility of the words even as he spoke them. I can't give back time, but I can pay for her medical care. I can make sure she has the best doctors, the best treatment, whatever she needs. I can... You think money fixes this? The coldness in Sophie's voice surprised them both. You think you can write a check and suddenly everything's okay? My mother doesn't want your money. She never wanted your money. She wanted you to want us. She wanted the man who got that tattoo with her to mean what he said about always finding his way back. But that man never existed, did he? He was just a summer romance for a rich boy playing at being in love before he went back to his real life. Alexander absorbed the words like blows. You're right. That's exactly what I was, but I'm not that person anymore, and Elena is dying, and His voice cracked again. I have a daughter. I have a daughter who spent her whole life thinking I didn't want her, who's working herself to death taking care of her mother because I wasn't there to help carry the weight. I can't fix the past, but I can damn well do something about the present. Sophie stood, her decision crystallizing. This was insane. She should walk away right now, go back to her life, pretend this conversation never happened. But her mother was dying, and this man, her father, the word felt strange even thinking it, had the resources to save her. Fine. You want to see my mother? Then come with me, right now. But you should know that when she finds out who you are, when she realizes what I've done by bringing you into our lives, she might never forgive me. Then we'll both live with her anger, Alexander said. It's better than living with her death. He pulled out his phone and made a call. James? I need the car at Lumiere in 5 minutes. Clear my schedule for the rest of the night. Cancel tomorrow's morning meetings. And James? Not a word to anyone about where I'm going or why. This is private. He ended the call and looked at Sophie. What's the address? Sophie told him, watching his expression shift as he processed the information. Washington Heights. One of the city's poorest neighborhoods, a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan, where men like Alexander Hunt conducted their business. To his credit, he didn't comment on the location, didn't let any judgment show on his face. I need to tell my manager I'm leaving, Sophie said. You're not going back to work here. Alexander's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Whatever they were paying you, whatever tips you were earning, consider yourself on paid leave until we figure this out. I'll handle Marcus. You can't just, I own 40% of the restaurant group that operates Lumiere, Alexander interrupted. I can absolutely handle Marcus. And if he has a problem with you leaving in the middle of your shift, he can take it up with me directly. Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to assert some kind of independence, but exhaustion and shock were catching up with her. She nodded mutely and followed Alexander out of the Astor room, through the main dining area where wealthy patrons looked up with curiosity at the sight of Alexander Hunt, escorting a waitress toward the exit, and out into the November night where a black Mercedes had just pulled to the curb. The driver, a man in his 30s with a discreet earpiece, opened the rear door without comment. Alexander gestured for Sophie to enter first, then slid in beside her. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, heading north toward Washington Heights, toward the cramped apartment where Elena Carter lay dying, toward a confrontation 25 years in the making. They rode in silence for the first 10 minutes, the city sliding past the tinted windows. Sophie kept stealing glances at Alexander, trying to reconcile this man with the fragments of information her mother had revealed over the years. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, his expression distant. The tattoo on his wrist seemed to pulse in the dim light of the car's interior. What do I say to her? Alexander's voice broke the silence. When I see Elena, what do I say? I don't know, Sophie answered honestly. I don't think there are words that fix this. No, but there might be words that start fixing it. He turned to look at her fully. You gave up a scholarship to take care of her. What were you studying? The question caught Sophie off guard. Pre-law. I had a full ride to Columbia. I wanted to be a civil rights attorney, to help people who couldn't afford legal representation. She heard the past tense in her own voice and hated it. Then my mother got sick and the scholarship didn't cover living expenses, and I had to make a choice. That's not a choice anyone should have to make. Alexander's jaw tightened. After we deal with Elena's medical situation, we're getting you back into school. Full support, tuition, living expenses, everything. You finish what you started. I can't accept that. Why not? Because I'm a stranger? Because you've spent your whole life being told you have to earn every scrap you get? Alexander's voice had an edge to it now. Let me be clear about something, Sophie. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering what I should have provided from the day you were born, support from your father. You can hate me for not being there before. That's fair. But don't refuse help now out of pride or principle. Your mother made that mistake 25 years ago, and look where it got us. Sophie wanted to argue, but the truth of his words settled over her like a weight. Pride wouldn't pay for her mother's treatment. Pride wouldn't get her back into Colombia. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The Mercedes turned onto Sophie's street, and Alexander's composure visibly cracked. He stared out the window at the aging buildings, the cracked sidewalks, the clusters of people huddled against the cold. This was poverty's face, and Sophie watched him see it, really see it, maybe for the first time in his carefully insulated life. "She lived like this for 25 years, he said softly, "raising our daughter here, working herself sick here, all because I was too much of a coward to stand up to my father and claim the family I'd created." "She had good years too," Sophie found herself saying. "When I was little, before she got sick, we were happy, poor but happy. She used to sing all the time. She had this beautiful voice. We'd make up games with whatever we could find. She'd take me to the library every Saturday, and we'd read together for hours. She made sure I knew I was loved, that I was wanted. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Alexander said. "But it shouldn't have been something she had to do alone." The car stopped in front of Sophie's building. The driver opened the door and Sophie stepped out into the cold night air, Alexander following close behind. She led him up the 4 flights of stairs, conscious of him taking in every detail: the broken elevator, the peeling paint, the smell of cooking and humanity packed too tightly together. This was her life laid bare, and she felt exposed in a way she'd never experienced before. At her apartment door, Sophie paused with her key in the lock. "Last chance to change your mind. Once we go through this door, there's no taking it back." "I know." Alexander's hand went to his wrist again, to the compass rose tattoo that had started all of this. "Open the door, Sophie." She did. The apartment was dark except for the lamp in her mother's bedroom. Sophie could hear the television playing softly. Her mother always left it on for company when she was alone. She dropped her keys on the small table by the door and called out, "Mama, I'm home early, and I brought someone." There was movement from the bedroom, then Elena's voice, weak but alert. "Sophie, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, Mama, I'm fine. But you need to come out here, please." Sophie flicked on the living room light and watched as her mother appeared in the bedroom doorway. Elena Carter, at 48, looked older than her years, worn down by illness and hard work. She wore an old bathrobe over flannel pajamas, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf. But even diminished by sickness, she had dignity in the set of her shoulders, pride in the way she held her head. Elena's eyes swept the room, landing on Sophie first, and then moving to the man standing beside her daughter. Sophie watched her mother's face go through the same sequence of emotions she'd witnessed in Alexander Hunt: confusion, recognition, shock. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Her other hand grabbed the door frame for support. "No," Elena breathed. "No, this isn't... Sophie, what did you do?" "Mama, I can explain." "Elena." Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. "After all these years, I never thought... I didn't know. She told me you were dead. My assistant did background research and found an Elena Carter who died in a car accident in 2003, and I thought..." He shook his head. "I've spent 25 years thinking you were dead." "I should have been," Elena said bitterly. "Dead would have been easier than this." Her eyes, still sharp despite her illness, fixed on Sophie. "You brought him here. Why would you bring him here?" "Because you're dying, Mama, and I'm drowning trying to save you, and he has the resources to help. I saw his tattoo, the same one you have, and I just knew. I knew it was him." Elena's hand went to her own wrist, to the compass rose that matched Alexander's. This was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to mean we'd always find each other. Instead, it's just a reminder of the biggest mistake I ever made. "I was the mistake?" Alexander's voice cracked. "Or was it trusting me?" "Both, neither. I don't know." Elena's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto the worn couch. Her breathing labored from the small exertion. "You offered me money to kill our baby, Alexander. You looked me in the eye and told me $50,000 should be enough to make the problem go away. What was I supposed to do? Believe that you'd suddenly become a different person if I kept the pregnancy? Watch you resent me and our child for ruining your perfect future? So you lied to me instead. You told me our baby was dead, let me believe it for 25 years, while you raised our daughter alone in— Alexander gestured at the cramped apartment, his frustration and guilt warring in his expression. In poverty. That was better? For her? Yes. Elena's eyes blazed with sudden fire, her weakness falling away in the face of her anger. Sophie never had to wonder if her father wanted her or if he was just tolerating her existence out of obligation. She never had to watch her father's wealthy family look down on her mother. She never had to be the inconvenient reminder of a rich boy's summer mistake. I gave her what I could, love, security, in knowing she was chosen and wanted, not just endured. That was better than anything your money could have provided. Sophie stood frozen between them, watching 25 years of pain and anger and regret spill out into her small living room. She wanted to scream at them both, wanted to demand they stop fighting about the past and focus on the present, on the fact that her mother was dying and they were wasting time on ancient wounds. But Alexander spoke first, and his words were so quiet, so devastated, that they stopped Elena's tirade cold. You're right, about all of it. I was a coward. I chose my father's approval over you, chose money and status over love, chose the easy path instead of the right one. And you and Sophie paid the price for my weakness. He crossed the room and knelt in front of Elena, his expensive suit touching the worn carpet. But I'm here now, and our daughter just told me you're dying. So whatever anger you have, and you have every right to all of it, can we put it aside long enough to get you help? Please, Elena, let me do this one thing right. Elena stared down at him, her eyes filling with tears. Sophie watched her mother's careful armor crack, watched 25 years of carrying everything alone finally become too heavy to bear. I can't afford your help, Elena whispered. I couldn't afford it then, and I can't afford it now. You're not paying for anything. This isn't charity, and it's not buying forgiveness. This is a father taking care of his daughter's mother. This is me trying to be less of a disaster as a human being. Alexander reached up and gently took Elena's hand. Please, let me call my doctors. Let me get you into a hospital tonight. Let me do something that isn't running away. Sophie held her breath, watching her mother war with pride and exhaustion and the simple mathematical reality that she needed help she couldn't provide for herself. Finally, Elena nodded, the gesture small and defeated and resigned. Okay, Alexander, you want to save me? Then save me. But this doesn't fix us. This doesn't erase what happened or make us a family. This is just medical care. Nothing more. Medical care is enough for tonight, Alexander said. He pulled out his phone and made another call. Dr. Morrison? Alexander Hunt. I need you to arrange immediate admission to Cedars Medical Center. Full workup, private suite, whatever tests are necessary. The patient is Elena Carter. He paused, meeting Elena's eyes. The mother of my daughter. Yes, you heard that right. I'll explain later. We'll be there in 30 minutes. He ended the call and stood, helping Elena to her feet. Sophie rushed to her mother's side, supporting her as Alexander stepped back to give them space. Mama, you need to get dressed. We're going to the hospital right now. Elena looked between Sophie and Alexander, her expression complex and unreadable. This is crazy. All of this is crazy. A few hours ago, you were serving him dinner. Now he's, what, playing father? Playing hero? I'm not playing anything, Alexander said quietly. I'm 25 years too late, but I'm here. That has to count for something. It counts for tonight, Elena repeated. Tomorrow, we'll see what it counts for then. Sophie helped her mother into the bedroom to change, leaving Alexander standing alone in the small living room. Through the thin walls, Sophie could hear him moving around, could imagine him taking in the poverty of their lives with new understanding. When they emerged 10 minutes later, Elena dressed in clean clothes, her breathing already ragged from the simple act of changing, Alexander was standing by the small bookshelf, looking at photographs. You kept pictures, he said, wonder in his voice. He held up a frame containing a photo of Sophie at 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera. She looks happy. She was happy, Elena said firmly. We both were. Poor, but happy. Remember that, Alexander? When you start thinking your money can buy back the past, it can't. No amount of money can give you the years you missed. I know, but maybe it can buy us a future where you're alive to be angry with me for all the years I wasn't there. Alexander set down the photograph and opened the apartment door. The car's waiting. Let's get you help. They descended the 4 flights of stairs slowly, Sophie and Alexander supporting Elena between them. The Mercedes idled at the curb, and they settled Elena into the back seat with careful hands. Sophie climbed in beside her mother, and Alexander took the front passenger seat, already on his phone making more calls, mobilizing resources with the ease of someone accustomed to making the impossible happen through sheer force of will and unlimited funds. As the car pulled away from the curb, heading toward Cedars Medical Center on the Upper East Side, Sophie looked back at her building, at the only home she'd really known, at the small apartment where her mother had raised her alone, at the life that had been their whole world until tonight. Everything was changing, everything had changed, and Sophie didn't know if that was salvation or disaster. Her mother's hand found hers in the darkness of the car's interior, squeezing weakly. "Whatever happens next," Elena whispered, "I need you to know. I don't regret keeping you. Never for a second. You're the only thing I got right." Sophie squeezed back, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Mama. I know." In the front seat, Alexander Hunt stared straight ahead, his hand pressed against his wrist, against the compass rose tattoo that had finally, after 25 years, pointed him back toward the family he'd abandoned. Whether he deserved forgiveness, whether Elena would survive long enough to give it, whether Sophie could ever truly think of this stranger as her father, those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, they were simply 3 people bound by blood and mistakes, and the desperate hope that it wasn't too late to salvage something from the wreckage of the past. The Mercedes glided through Manhattan's nighttime streets with the smooth inevitability of money in motion. Sophie watched the city transform through the tinted windows as they traveled south and east, Washington Heights giving way to Harlem, then the Upper West Side, the buildings growing taller and cleaner, the streets wider and better lit. This was the geography of inequality rendered in glass and steel, each block marking the distance between her world and her father's. Her father. The words still felt foreign in her mind, like a language she'd never learned to speak. Elena had gone quiet in the seat beside her, her breathing shallow and labored. Sophie kept her hand wrapped around her mother's, feeling the fragile bones beneath papery skin, counting each rise and fall of her chest like prayers. In the front seat, Alexander continued his calls, his voice low and commanding as he orchestrated Elena's admission with the efficiency of someone accustomed to bending reality to his will. "Dr. Morrison will meet us at the emergency entrance," Alexander said, ending another call and turning slightly to address them. "He's the head of internal medicine at Cedars, one of the best diagnosticians in the country. He'll coordinate with pulmonology, oncology, infectious disease, whatever specialists are needed. We'll have answers by morning." "Answers cost money," Elena said quietly, her first word since they'd left the apartment. "How much is tonight going to cost me, Alexander? How deep in debt am I going to be to you?" "You're not in debt to me. This isn't a loan, Elena. This is—" "What? Guilt money? Payment for 25 years of child support you never provided?" Elena's voice was weak but sharp, cutting through the car's leather-scented interior. "I need to know what I'm agreeing to. I need to know what strings are attached to your generosity." Alexander was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Sophie hadn't heard before. Not anger, but something deeper and more painful. "There are no strings. You want me to disappear after tonight? I'll disappear. You want me to pay for your treatment and never contact Sophie again? I'll do that too. You want to take my money and use it to build a life as far away from me as possible? That's your right. I'm not using your illness as leverage to force my way into your lives. I'm trying to do one thing that isn't selfish and cowardly. Let me have that much at least." Elena turned her head to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since he'd knelt in front of her in the apartment. Sophie saw something shift in her mother's expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a recognition that the 23-year-old boy who'd offered her money to end a pregnancy had been replaced by a 48-year-old man who understood exactly what he'd lost. "One day at a time," Elena said finally. "We get through tonight. We get answers. Then we figure out what comes next. But Alexander, don't make promises you can't keep. Don't offer Sophie a future and then disappear when the guilt wears off, and you remember that we're inconvenient complications in your billionaire life. I won't. You already did. Once. 25 years ago, you chose the easy path. So forgive me if I don't trust your intentions just because you're having a crisis of conscience in the back of your Mercedes. The words landed like blows, and Sophie watched her father absorb them without defense. He simply nodded and turned back to face forward, his hand once again finding the compass rose tattoo on his wrist. Sophie wondered if he'd touched it this often before tonight, or if it was only now, confronted with the living consequences of his past, that the tattoo had become something more than decoration. Cedars Medical Center rose from the Upper East Side like a monument to wealth and health, its gleaming facade promising the kind of care that only money could buy. The emergency entrance was discreetly located on a side street, away from the main hospital's bustle. As the Mercedes pulled up, Sophie saw a man in his 60s waiting by the doors, silver-haired, distinguished, wearing a white coat over expensive casual clothes that suggested he'd been summoned from home. "That's Dr. Morrison," Alexander said. The driver opened the door and Alexander was out first, moving quickly to help Elena from the car. Sophie scrambled out behind them, watching as her mother swayed on her feet, catching herself against the Mercedes frame. "I've got you, Mama." Sophie wrapped an arm around her mother's waist, taking most of her weight. "Miss Carter, I'm Dr. David Morrison." The silver-haired man approached with the calm assurance of someone who'd spent 40 years managing medical crises. His eyes swept over Elena with professional assessment, already cataloging symptoms. "Let's get you inside and comfortable. We have a private suite ready on the 7th floor, and I've assembled a team to begin evaluation immediately." "In the middle of the night?" Elena's voice carried disbelief even through her exhaustion. "Don't your teams have families, lives? They're well compensated for their time, and they understand that illness doesn't keep business hours." Dr. Morrison gestured toward the entrance. "Shall we?" They moved inside as a unit, Dr. Morrison leading, Elena supported between Sophie and Alexander, hospital staff materializing from the pristine corridors to assist. Sophie had been in hospitals before, had spent hours in crowded emergency rooms waiting for her mother's name to be called, surrounded by other desperate people competing for limited resources and overworked doctors' attention. This was nothing like those experiences. This was medicine as privilege, smooth and silent and efficient. They bypassed the emergency room entirely, took a private elevator to the 7th floor, and emerged into a corridor that looked more like a hotel than a hospital. Soft lighting, artwork on the walls, carpeted floors that muffled footsteps. A nurse met them at the elevator, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands who introduced herself as Jennifer. "Ms. Carter, I'll be your primary nurse during your stay. Let's get you settled in your room, and then we'll begin the intake process." Jennifer's voice was gentle but professional as she took over supporting Elena from Sophie. "You must be exhausted." "I've been exhausted for 3 years," Elena said with a bitter laugh that dissolved into coughing. The cough racked her thin frame, bending her double, and Sophie felt panic spike through her chest as her mother struggled to catch her breath. Dr. Morrison was there instantly, his stethoscope already out, listening to Elena's lungs with focused intensity. "Significant congestion, possible fluid accumulation. Jennifer, let's get her on oxygen immediately and start the workup. I want a full respiratory panel, complete blood count, metabolic panel, chest X-ray and CT scan, cardiac enzymes." The medical terminology washed over Sophie as they moved down the corridor to a corner suite. The room beyond the shore was large and bright despite the late hour, with a proper hospital bed that looked nothing like the ancient mattress her mother slept on at home, a sitting area with a couch and chairs, and windows that overlooked the city. Jennifer helped Elena into a hospital gown with practiced efficiency while Dr. Morrison continued his examination, and Sophie stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether she should stay or leave, whether her presence was helpful or just another complication. "Sophie," her mother's voice, muffled by the oxygen mask Jennifer had just placed over her face, called her back to the present. "Come here, baby." Sophie crossed to the bed and took her mother's hand. Elena's eyes above the mask were frightened despite her earlier bravado, the reality of her situation finally penetrating the armor of pride and anger she'd maintained since Alexander appeared in their lives. "I'm scared," Elena whispered. I know, Mama, but you're getting help now. Real help. Dr. Morrison is going to figure out what's wrong and fix it. Miss Carter, I'm going to be honest with you. Dr. Morrison pulled up a chair beside the bed, his expression serious but not unkind. Based on your symptoms and physical presentation, we're looking at several possibilities, some serious, some less so. The good news is that we have the resources to investigate thoroughly and quickly. The tests I've ordered will give us a comprehensive picture by morning. In the meantime, we're going to make you as comfortable as possible and monitor you closely. Do you have any questions for me? Elena's eyes drifted to where Alexander stood near the window, his back to the room, his shoulders tight with tension. How much is this costing him? That's not something you need to worry about right now. It's the only thing I'm worried about. I've spent 25 years owing nobody nothing. I don't want to start now. Dr. Morrison glanced at Alexander, who turned to face them. Turned to a child. The billionaire's expression was carefully neutral, but Sophie could see the pain behind his eyes. Pain at being reduced to a source of funding, at being kept at arm's length even as he tried to help. Elena, the cost is irrelevant, Alexander said quietly. But if it matters to you, I'll have my accountants prepare a full breakdown of every expense. You can review it when you're well and decide what you want to do about it. But right now, tonight, just let us take care of you without negotiating the terms. Please. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded fractionally. Dr. Morrison stood, apparently satisfied that his patient wasn't going to bolt from the bed in a fit of stubborn pride. I'll be back in an hour with the first round of test results. Jennifer will be right outside if you need anything, and the call button is here. He indicated the remote attached to the bed rail. Try to rest, Ms. Carter. You're in good hands now. He left, taking most of the medical staff with him. Suddenly the room felt too quiet, too intimate, with just the three of them, mother, father, daughter, existing in the same space for the first time in a quarter century. Jennifer had dimmed the lights before leaving, and the soft glow from the monitors cast shadows across their faces. You should both go home, Elena said, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask. There's nothing you can do here. I'm not leaving. Sophie and Alexander spoke simultaneously, then looked at each other with expressions that might have been amusing under different circumstances. Sophie continued, Mama, I'm staying right here until we know what's wrong. Don't even try to argue with me. I'll stay too, Alexander said. If that's all right with you, Elena, I can wait in the hall if my presence makes you uncomfortable, but I'd like to be here, in case you need anything. Elena's eyes closed, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Do what you want, Alexander. You're paying for the room. Might as well use it. It wasn't permission exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. Alexander moved to the couch in the sitting area and lowered himself onto it, with the careful movements of a man trying to make himself as unobtrusive as possible. Sophie pulled a chair close to her mother's bedside and settled in for what she suspected would be a very long night. Time moved strangely in the hospital room. Minutes stretched into hours, marked only by the soft beeping of monitors and the whisper of oxygen flowing through Elena's mask. Jennifer returned periodically to check vitals, adjust medications, ask questions in her kind, efficient voice. Other medical staff came and went, phlebotomists drawing blood, radiology techs wheeling Elena away for scans, respiratory therapists assessing lung function. Each procedure carried its own anxiety, its own weight of implications. Sophie dozed fitfully in her chair, jerking awake whenever the pattern of her mother's breathing changed or a new alarm sounded. Each time she woke, she found Alexander still awake on the couch, his eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that suggested he was trying to memorize her, to make up for 25 years of absence through sheer force of attention. Around 3 a.m, when Elena had fallen into a restless sleep and the hospital had grown quiet, Alexander spoke for the first time in hours. What was she like? When you were growing up? Sophie lifted her head, surprised by the question. My mother? Yes, I knew her when she was 23. Brilliant, passionate, unafraid of anything. She used to quote poetry at me, used to make me think about things I'd never questioned. She saw the world differently than anyone I'd ever met, but that was before everything fell apart. I want to know who she became, who she was to you. Sophie considered the question, trying to find words adequate to explain her mother's complexity. She was strong. Even when we had nothing, even when she was working 3 jobs to keep us fed, she never complained. She'd come home exhausted and still help me with my homework, still make time to read to me before bed. She made me believe I could be anything, go anywhere, achieve whatever I wanted. She sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she'd never had. She gave you what my money could have provided easily, Alexander said. Education, security, a future. Instead, she wore herself down to nothing, trying to give you those things through sheer force of will. She gave me more than security. She gave me dignity. She gave me a mother who chose me, who wanted me, who never made me feel like I was a burden or a mistake. Sophie's voice sharpened despite her exhaustion. Can your money buy that? Can your billions purchase the certainty that you're loved unconditionally? Alexander absorbed the rebuke in silence. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. No, it can't. And I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who want something from me, who see me as a means to an end, who would disappear if the money disappeared. I built that world. I chose it. And now I'm 48 years old and realizing that the only 2 people on earth who might have loved me for myself are this woman who won't look at me and a daughter who barely knows me. The honesty caught Sophie off guard. She'd spent the evening thinking of Alexander Hunt as a type, the wealthy villain, the absent father, the man who'd abandoned them. But sitting in the dim hospital room, watching him struggle with regret that no amount of money could ease, she saw something more complicated. A man who'd made terrible choices and was only now beginning to understand their full cost. She used to trace her tattoo and cry, Sophie said quietly, when she thought I was asleep. I'd hear her in the next room, and I'd know she was touching that compass rose and thinking about you. Even after everything, even after all the years and all the pain, some part of her never stopped loving the person she thought you were. Alexander's hand went to his own wrist, to the matching tattoo. I got this removed twice. Once right after Elena told me about the miscarriage. I couldn't stand looking at it, couldn't stand the reminder of what I'd lost. But it grew back both times. Not literally, but in my dreams, in my mind. So eventually I had it re-inked. I told myself it was about remembering a mistake, learning from the past. But really, I think some part of me was keeping a connection to the only woman I've ever actually loved. The confession hung in the air between them. Before Sophie could respond, the door opened and Dr. Morrison entered, followed by 2 other doctors, a woman in her 50s and a younger man with tired eyes. Dr. Morrison's expression was serious, and Sophie felt her heart rate spike as she stood quickly, moving closer to her mother's bedside. The movement woke Elena, who blinked in confusion before focusing on the doctors. She reached up to pull down her oxygen mask. What did you find? Dr. Morrison pulled up a chair and opened the tablet he carried. Ms. Carter, we've completed the initial workup and have some preliminary results. The good news is that we don't see any evidence of cancer. No masses, no tumors, no malignancies showing up on imaging or blood work. Sophie felt the room tilt with relief, felt tears spring to her eyes. Not cancer. Whatever was wrong, at least it wasn't that. Beside the bed, she heard Alexander release a breath he'd been holding, but Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. However, your condition is serious. You're presenting with severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, complicated by pneumonia in both lungs. Your oxygen saturation levels are dangerously low. Additionally, your blood work shows markers consistent with chronic stress, malnutrition, and severe anemia. Your heart is showing signs of strain from working too hard to compensate for your compromised lung function. Elena stared at him. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. How do I have COPD? COPD isn't always caused by smoking. In your case, we believe it's the result of years of exposure to environmental pollutants, poor air quality, and occupational hazards combined with inadequate medical care and chronic stress. You mentioned working in cleaning services, restaurant kitchens, and other jobs where you were exposed to chemical cleaners, poor ventilation, and respiratory irritants. For 25 years, Elena said quietly, 3 jobs at a time, sometimes 4. Whatever work I could find. Those exposures, combined with the constant physical stress and lack of treatment for recurring respiratory infections, have caused significant damage to your lungs. The pneumonia is severe, but treatable with aggressive antibiotic therapy. The COPD is a chronic condition that will require ongoing management, medications, oxygen therapy, pulmonary rehabilitation, and significant lifestyle changes. Lifestyle changes? Elena's laugh was bitter. That's a nice way of saying I can't work anymore, isn't it? That I'm too broken to do the only things I know how to do? The female doctor, Dr. Chen, according to her name tag, leaned forward. Ms. Carter, I'm a pulmonologist. I specialize in lung diseases. What Dr. Morrison is telling you is that your lungs are severely damaged, but the damage is not irreversible. With proper treatment, rest, and time to heal, we can significantly improve your lung function. But you're right that you cannot continue working the kinds of jobs that cause this damage. Your body simply cannot sustain that level of stress anymore. So what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live? Elena's voice rose, panic bleeding through the exhaustion. I have a daughter who's already sacrificed her future to take care of me. I have rent I can't pay. I have... Elena! Alexander's voice cut through her rising hysteria. He'd moved from the couch to stand at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the rail. You don't have to worry about money, not anymore. I'll take care of everything. The apartment, the bills, whatever you need while you recover. And after you recover, we'll figure out what comes next. Together, if you'll let me. But right now, you need to focus on getting well. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's child support. 25 years late, with interest. Alexander's attempt at lightness fell flat, and he abandoned it quickly. Elena, please. You spent a quarter-century taking care of our daughter alone. Let me take care of you now. Let me do this one thing right. Elena looked at Sophie, her eyes searching her daughter's face. What do you think, baby? Should I let him buy his way back into our lives? Sophie felt the weight of the question, understood that her mother was asking something deeper than the surface words suggested. This wasn't just about accepting medical care. This was about whether they could trust Alexander Hunt, whether they could risk opening themselves to disappointment again, whether money could ever be separated from the power dynamics it created. I think, Sophie said carefully, that you're sick and you need help, and right now he's offering the kind of help we can't get anywhere else. I think we can accept his help and still set boundaries. I think... She paused, trying to articulate something she was only beginning to understand herself. I think maybe he's not the same person he was 25 years ago, and maybe we owe it to ourselves to find out who he is now before we decide whether he deserves a place in our lives. Elena closed her eyes, and Sophie watched her mother's face cycle through emotions, fear and anger and resignation, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet with tears. Okay, Elena whispered. Okay, Alexander, help us. But I'm keeping track of every dollar, and someday, somehow, I'm paying you back. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I need to. It's the only way I can accept this without feeling like I'm selling my dignity for medical care. So that's my condition. You keep records, and when I'm well enough to work again, different work that won't kill me, I start paying you back, even if it takes the rest of my life. Alexander nodded slowly. If that's what you need, then yes, we'll keep records. But Elena, I hope someday you'll understand that I'm not keeping score. I'm just trying to be less of a disaster as a father, and... He hesitated, then pushed forward. And as someone who loved you and destroyed that love through cowardice and stupidity. The words hung in the air, naked and vulnerable. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat, apparently deciding this was an appropriate moment to reclaim control of the conversation. Ms. Carter, we'd like to admit you for at least a week, possibly longer, depending on how you respond to treatment. We'll start IV antibiotics immediately, continue oxygen therapy, and begin working with you on breathing exercises and techniques to improve your lung function. It's going to be uncomfortable and exhausting, but if you commit to the treatment, we should see significant improvement. A week in the hospital. Elena looked around the luxurious room with something like disbelief. I've never stayed in a place this nice in my entire life, and I'm going to spend a week here as a patient. You're going to spend a week here getting well, Dr. Chen corrected gently. And Ms. Carter, This is serious, but it's not a death sentence. With proper care you're going to receive, you have years ahead of you. Don't give up on yourself yet. The doctors left after providing more details about treatment plans and schedules. Jennifer returned to adjust Elena's medications and check her vitals one more time. And then, finally, the three of them were alone again in the quiet room as dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the windows. Sophie felt exhaustion pulling at her, felt the adrenaline that had sustained her through the longest night of her life finally beginning to drain away. Beside her, her mother had fallen into what looked like genuine sleep, her breathing easier now with the oxygen and the first dose of antibiotics working through her system. And across the room, Alexander sat on the couch with his head in his hands, his expensive suit rumpled, his careful composure completely shattered. "You should go home," Sophie said quietly. "Get some rest. We'll be here when you come back." Alexander looked up, his blue eyes, her eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted. "What if I go home and wake up tomorrow and realize this was all a dream? What if I lose you both again?" "You can't lose something you never really had," Sophie said, but without cruelty. "We're not going anywhere. My mother needs time to heal, and I need time to figure out what it means to have a father after 25 years of not having one. But Alexander, we're not disappearing, we're not running, we're just trying to survive what comes next, together, maybe, if you can be patient with us." "I can be patient. I can be whatever you need me to be." Alexander stood slowly, moving toward the door. "I'll be back in a few hours. I'll bring clothes for you, food, whatever you need. And Sophie? Thank you for bringing me here, for giving me a chance I don't deserve, for being my daughter, even though I've done nothing to earn that title." He left before Sophie could respond, and she heard his footsteps receding down the corridor. Alone with her sleeping mother, Sophie finally allowed herself to cry. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, releasing the tension and terror and impossible hope of the past 12 hours. Her mother was going to live. They had help now, real help, the kind of help that money could buy. And somewhere out there in the pre-dawn city, a billionaire was grappling with the discovery that he had a daughter and a second chance at being something other than the man who'd chosen money over love 25 years ago. Sophie didn't know if they could truly become a family, didn't know if the damage of the past could ever be fully healed. But for the first time in 3 years, for the first time since her mother had gotten sick, Sophie felt something that wasn't despair. She felt possibility. Sophie woke to the sound of her mother coughing, the harsh rattle pulling her from a dreamless sleep. She jerked upright in the chair beside the hospital bed, her neck screaming in protest from the awkward angle she'd slept in. Morning light flooded through the windows, bright and unforgiving, revealing the reality of their new circumstances with crystalline clarity. Elena was awake, struggling to sit up against the pillows, her hand fumbling for the call button. Sophie was on her feet instantly, reaching for her mother's shoulder to steady her. "Easy, Mama. Let me get the nurse." But Jennifer was already pushing through the door, her practiced eyes sweeping over Elena with quick assessment. "Miss Carter, how are you feeling? Pain level?" "Like someone filled my lungs with concrete." Elena's voice was raw, strained through the oxygen mask she'd pulled aside to speak. "And I need to use the bathroom." "Let's get you there safely." Jennifer moved with efficient grace, helping Elena to her feet and supporting her weight as they shuffled toward the private bathroom. Sophie hovered nearby, feeling useless, until Jennifer gave her a kind smile. "Why don't you get yourself some coffee from the family lounge? Your mother's in good hands and you look like you could use a break." Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to insist on staying, but her bladder was screaming and her mouth tasted like something had died in it. She nodded and slipped out into the corridor, following signs to the family lounge. The 7th floor remained eerily quiet for a hospital. No overhead pages, no rushing staff, no crowds of worried families. This was medicine for people who could afford privacy, and Sophie felt like an imposter walking these carpeted halls in a wrinkled server's uniform from the night before. The family lounge was empty, decorated like an upscale hotel lobby, with leather furniture and a coffee station that offered real espresso rather than the burnt sludge she'd learned to tolerate in public hospital waiting rooms. She made herself a latte, because why not? Everything here was already being charged to Alexander's account, and stood by the window looking out at the city waking up below. From this height, Manhattan looked clean and orderly, The morning traffic a distant murmur, the poverty and struggle invisible from 7 floors up. Sophie. She turned to find Alexander in the doorway, and for a moment she barely recognized him. Gone was the immaculate billionaire from last night. He wore jeans and a plain sweater, his hair uncombed, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He carried shopping bags in both hands and looked like he hadn't slept at all. "I brought clothes," he said, lifting the bag slightly. "I had my assistant buy a selection since I didn't know your sizes. And your mother's, I guessed based on—" He faltered, apparently realizing how strange it was to be discussing his daughter's clothing sizes when they'd known each other less than 12 hours. "There's also food, real food, not hospital food, and coffee, though I see you've found some." Sophie looked at the bags, at the expensive logos printed on them, and felt a complicated mix of gratitude and resentment. "You didn't have to do this." "I know, but I wanted to. Is your mother awake? How is she?" "Awake, in pain, coughing, but alive." Sophie took a sip of her latte, buying time to organize her thoughts. "The nurse is helping her now. You can go in when she's settled." Alexander set the bags down on one of the leather chairs and moved to stand beside Sophie at the window. They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers connected by blood and circumstances, neither quite sure how to bridge the chasm of years between them. "I need to tell you something," Alexander said finally, "about why I offered your mother money all those years ago. It's not an excuse, but you deserve to understand the context." Sophie said nothing, waiting. Alexander continued, his voice low and measured, as if he'd rehearsed this confession in the pre-dawn hours. "My father, your grandfather, was a man who believed that money solved every problem and created every opportunity. He built his fortune from nothing, and he was determined that his children would never experience the poverty he'd escaped. When I told him Elena was pregnant, his first response was to ask how much it would cost to make the problem disappear, not the pregnancy. He didn't even think of it in human terms, just a problem, a complication, a threat to the life he'd planned for me." Alexander's hand found his wrist, fingers circling the compass rose tattoo. "I was 23 years old and completely under his control, financially, emotionally, psychologically. He told me that if I chose Elena and the baby, he'd cut me off completely. No inheritance, no family support, nothing. I'd be starting from zero with a woman from a poor background and a child to support. And I believed him when he said it would destroy all 3 of our lives, that poverty would poison whatever love Elena and I had, that our child would suffer for my moment of romantic idealism. So you chose money over us," Sophie said flatly. "You chose the easy path." "I did. And I've regretted that choice every day since, even when I didn't know you existed." Alexander turned to face her fully. "But here's what I learned, Sophie, in the 25 years I spent building my fortune. My father was wrong about almost everything. Money doesn't solve problems, it just masks them. And the life he pushed me toward, the marriage to another wealthy family, the endless pursuit of more wealth and more power, it was empty. Completely, utterly empty. I have $8 billion, and nobody who actually knows me. I have influence and connections and the ability to make things happen with a phone call, and I've never been lonelier in my life." Sophie studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found only exhausted honesty. "Is that supposed to make me feel sorry for you? Poor rich man, sad in his mansion? No. It's supposed to help you understand that I know exactly what I lost, and that no amount of money, not 8 billion, not 80 billion, can buy back the years I could have spent being your father. Money can buy your mother's treatment, can pay for your education, can provide security and comfort. But it can't buy the first time you said Dada, or your first day of school, or the 1,000 small moments that make up a childhood. Those are gone forever, and I have to live with that." The raw pain in his voice cracked something open in Sophie's chest. She'd spent the night alternating between hope and suspicion, wondering if Alexander's sudden appearance was genuine or just another wealthy man playing at redemption. But standing here in the morning light, watching him struggle with regrets that money couldn't fix, she saw something authentic in his grief. "My mother used to tell me that my father was someone who couldn't handle being a parent, that he'd made a choice, and we should respect it and move on with our lives." Sophie's throat tightened around the words. "But sometimes Late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her crying. And I knew she was crying for you, for the person she thought you were, for the family we could have been. She never said she blamed you, but I blamed you enough for both of us. You had every right to. I still do. Just because you show up now with your bags of designer clothes and your unlimited bank account doesn't erase 25 years of nothing. It doesn't undo the nights my mother worked herself sick, or the scholarship I gave up, or the future I lost taking care of her. Your regret doesn't fix any of that. I know. Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. But maybe my presence, going forward, can help build something new. Not a replacement for what should have been, but something. If you'll let me try. Before Sophie could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from Jennifer. Your mother is asking for you both. They walked back to Elena's room in silence, Alexander carrying his shopping bags like peace offerings. Jennifer met them at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the professional smile of someone managing a complicated situation. She's had her morning medications and some breakfast. Dr. Morrison will be by in an hour to discuss the treatment plan in more detail. She's tired, but alert. Jennifer lowered her voice. And she's asking questions about costs. I told her to discuss that with Dr. Morrison, but she's anxious about it. I'll handle it, Alexander said. He thanked Jennifer and pushed open the door, Sophie following close behind. Elena looked smaller in the morning light, diminished by the hospital bed and the tangle of tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. But her eyes were sharp when they fixed on Alexander, and Sophie recognized the stubborn pride that had carried her mother through 25 years of hardship. You came back, Elena said. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it carried surprise, as if she'd expected Alexander to disappear once the initial crisis passed. I said I would. Alexander set the shopping bags down and moved closer to the bed, but stopped several feet away, apparently uncertain about how close he was allowed to come. I brought clothes for both of you, and food, and I wanted to be here when the doctors give you more information about your treatment. So you can pay the bills. Elena's voice was flat. That's what this is about, right? You're here to manage the damage, to make sure the mother of your secret daughter doesn't die and become a PR nightmare for your company. Elena, that's not fair, Sophie started, but her mother cut her off with a sharp look. Isn't it? Sophie, you're young and hopeful, and you want to believe that people can change, that your father showing up after 25 years means something beyond guilt and obligation. But I've lived long enough to know that men like Alexander Hunt don't suddenly become different people overnight. They do what's convenient, what serves their interests, and right now it's convenient for him to play the concerned father. Alexander absorbed the attack without flinching. You're right. I am here partly because it serves my interests, specifically my interest in not being the kind of man who abandons his family twice. But Elena, I'm also here because seeing you last night, seeing Sophie, understanding what you've both been through while I built my empire on the foundation of abandoning you, it destroyed something in me. Some comfortable lie I'd been telling myself about having made the right choice, the practical choice. You were right when you told me 25 years ago that I wasn't the man you'd fallen in love with. I proved that by offering you money instead of support. But maybe I can become someone better. Maybe it's not too late for that. It's 25 years too late, Elena said, but her voice wavered slightly, the certainty cracking at the edges. For some things, yes. I can't be there for Sophie's childhood. I can't share the weight you carried alone. I can't undo the damage my absence caused. But I can be here now, today, and tomorrow, and every day after if you'll let me. Not because it's convenient, but because you're the mother of my daughter and you're sick and you need help, and I finally have the chance to do something that isn't selfish and cowardly. Sophie watched her mother's face cycle through emotions, anger giving way to exhaustion, exhaustion bleeding into something that might have been hope. Elena's hand moved to her wrist, to the compass rose tattoo, tracing it with the same unconscious gesture Sophie had seen 1,000 times. You said that tattoo meant we'd always find our way back to each other, Elena whispered. You said a compass rose never lies, that it always points true north, but you lied, Alexander. You lied about everything. The tattoo didn't lie. I did. The compass pointed true, I just refused to follow it. Alexander pulled up his sleeve, revealing his own matching tattoo. I've carried this for 25 years, Elena. Sometimes I'd touch it and think about you, about what might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose love over money. And now, against all odds, the compass finally brought me back. Maybe too late, maybe too broken to fix, but I'm here, and I'm not running away again. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the whisper of oxygen flowing through Elena's mask. Sophie felt like she was watching something private and profound, a conversation that had been waiting 25 years to happen. She started to move toward the door to give them privacy, but her mother's voice stopped her. "Sophie, stay. This concerns you too." Elena's eyes remained fixed on Alexander. "You want to help? You want to prove you're different? Then here's what I need. I need complete transparency about costs, every test, every treatment, every medication. I need to know exactly what I'm accepting from you. And I need you to promise that if I recover, if I get well enough to work again, you'll let me pay you back, even if it takes decades, even if it's just $50 a month. I need to know this is a loan, not charity, not guilt money, not you buying your way into our lives. Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I need to. It's the only way I can accept this without feeling like I'm selling my independence, my dignity, the self-respect I've clung to through 25 years of poverty." Elena's voice strengthened, fueled by the fierce pride that had sustained her through everything. "You built your empire. Let me build mine. Even if my empire is just the knowledge that I paid my own way, that I didn't let illness turn me into someone dependent on a man who abandoned me." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. "I understand. We'll structure it however you need, legally documented, with payment terms, whatever makes you comfortable. But Elena, I want you to consider something. The money I'm spending on your treatment, it's a fraction of what I should have contributed over the years in child support. If we calculate 25 years of reasonable child support payments, adjusted for inflation and my actual income over those years, we're talking about millions of dollars. So from a purely mathematical standpoint, you're not taking charity. You're accepting partial payment of a debt I already owe you." Sophie saw her mother's expression shift, saw the argument she'd been preparing falter in the face of this logic. Elena opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Millions? At minimum. I made my first million when I was 28. My income has increased exponentially since then. Even by the most conservative estimates, I owe you far more than any hospital stay could cost." Alexander pulled out his phone. "I can have my attorneys draw up the calculations if you'd like to see the math. Child support, adjusted for cost of living, with reasonable interest for 25 years of non-payment. It won't make up for my absence, but it's a start toward financial justice." Elena stared at him, and Sophie saw tears gathering in her mother's eyes. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Anger and relief and the slow crumbling of defenses built over a quarter-century of survival. "You're serious. You're actually serious. Completely. Elena, you kept our daughter alive and healthy and educated on nothing but your own determination. The least I can do is acknowledge the debt I owe you for that." Alexander moved closer to the bed, close enough now that Elena would have to actively recoil to maintain distance. "Let me do this. Let me pay what I should have paid all along. And if you want to frame it as a loan that you'll pay back someday, that's your right. But please understand that from my perspective, I'm not giving you charity. I'm settling a debt." Sophie watched her mother's careful armor finally crack open. Elena reached up with a shaking hand and pulled down her oxygen mask, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so tired, Alexander. I'm so tired of fighting everything alone, of pretending I don't need help, of being strong when I just want to fall apart. But I don't know how to stop being that person. I don't know how to let someone help me without feeling weak." "You're the strongest person I've ever known," Alexander said quietly. "Strong enough to raise our daughter alone. Strong enough to work yourself nearly to death to give her opportunities. Strong enough to tell me to leave when I offered you blood money instead of love. That strength doesn't disappear just because you accept help. It just means you're strong enough to recognize when the fight needs to change." Elena sobbed once, a broken sound that seemed to release years of pent-up exhaustion. Alexander looked at Sophie, a question in his eyes, and she nodded permission. He sat carefully on the edge of the hospital bed and took Elena's hand, tentatively, as if touching something precious and fragile. I'm sorry, he whispered. For all of it. For being 23 and stupid, for choosing money over you, for not fighting harder against my father's expectations, for letting you believe you had to do everything alone. I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so deeply sorry. Elena gripped his hand with what strength she had left, and Sophie moved to her mother's other side, taking her other hand. For the first time in her life, Sophie stood between both of her parents, connected by touch and blood, and the tentative hope that broken things could sometimes be repaired. They stayed like that until Dr. Morrison arrived with his team, until the reality of treatment plans and medication schedules and physical therapy appointments pulled them back into the present. But something had shifted in that room, something fundamental. The wall Elena had built between herself and Alexander hadn't crumbled completely, but it had developed cracks and light was starting to seep through. Over the next 3 days, they settled into a routine. Sophie and Alexander took turns staying with Elena. Sophie during the days, Alexander during the nights, both of them present for doctor consultations and critical decisions. Alexander worked from Elena's hospital room, his laptop balanced on his knees, conducting business in low voices while Elena slept. Sophie used the time to catch up on sleep, to shower in the private bathroom attached to the suite, to eat meals from the shopping bags Alexander kept replenishing. They learned to exist in the same space, these three people bound by biology and circumstances. Alexander told stories about his business empire, but also about his failures, his regrets, the empty mansion he returned to each night. Elena, slowly growing stronger on antibiotics and oxygen therapy, began to share memories of Sophie's childhood, the good parts, the moments of joy carved out of poverty. And Sophie, watching her parents navigate this strange new reality, began to see them as people rather than archetypes. Not the absent villain and the martyred saint, but two flawed humans who'd made terrible choices and were trying to find their way back to something true. On the fourth morning, Dr. Morrison arrived with news. Elena's pneumonia was responding well to treatment. Her oxygen saturation levels had improved significantly. The COPD remained a chronic condition, but with proper management and rest, she could expect years of reasonable quality of life. You're not dying, Doctor, Morrison said with a smile. You're recovering. I'd like to keep you another 3 days for observation and to finalize your discharge care plan, but Ms. Carter, you're going to be fine. The relief in the room was palpable. Elena cried, Sophie cried. Even Alexander's eyes were suspiciously bright as he excused himself to make phone calls. But underneath the relief, Sophie felt a new tension building. Her mother was recovering, which meant the crisis that had thrown them together was resolving. Soon they'd have to figure out what came next, how to build a relationship without the emergency that had forced them into proximity. That evening, after the doctors had left and Elena had fallen into exhausted sleep, Sophie found Alexander in the family lounge. He stood at the window again, looking out at the city, his phone dark in his hand. He looked older than 48, worn down by sleepless nights and emotional upheaval. She's going to live, Sophie said, announcing herself. You heard Dr. Morrison. She's going to be okay. I heard. Alexander turned to face her. I've been thinking about what happens next. Where she'll stay during recovery, what kind of care she'll need, how we figure out this family thing when there's no emergency forcing us together. I've been thinking about that too. Sophie moved to stand beside him at the window. She can't go back to the apartment. 4 flights of stairs with damaged lungs, that's impossible. And she can't work. At least not for months. Maybe longer. I want to offer something, but I'm afraid you'll both think I'm trying to buy you. Alexander's voice was careful, tentative. I have a house in Westchester. Nothing ostentatious. Just a place I bought years ago and never use. It has a full staff, including a private nurse on call. It's quiet, peaceful, with grounds where she could walk during recovery. I could set it up for both of you, give you time to heal and rest and figure things out without worrying about rent or stairs or money. Sophie felt her defenses rising automatically. You want to install us in your spare house like what? Like charity cases? Like pets you're rehabilitating? No, I want to give my daughter and her mother a safe place to recover from trauma I helped create. But Sophie, I'm learning that everything I offer sounds like manipulation to you because money has been the tool I've used to avoid real connection my entire life. So I don't know how to make this sound genuine. I just know that your mother needs somewhere safe to heal, and you need time to rest and maybe figure out who you are without the weight of survival crushing you. And I have resources sitting unused that could provide that. It seems insane not to offer them. Sophie studied him in the fading light. The billionaire titan from that first night at Lumiere had been replaced by someone more human, more vulnerable. She saw traces of herself in his face. The set of his jaw when he was trying not to show emotion, the way his hand moved to his wrist when he was anxious, the blue eyes that mirrored her own. I need to talk to my mother. This has to be her choice, not something we decide for her. Of course. But Sophie, whatever you both decide, I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere. Whether you accept the house or not, whether your mother ever forgives me or not, whether we build something that looks like a family or just maintain polite distance, I'm here now. No more running, no more choosing money over what matters. Sophie wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that had always wondered what it would be like to have a father, desperately wanted to trust that this change was real. But another part, the part shaped by 25 years of his absence, remained cautious. Actions over time, she said finally. That's what proves change. Not words in a hospital room when emotions are high, but what you do over months and years when the crisis has passed and being a father becomes inconvenient or complicated. That's what I need to see before I can trust this. Then you'll see it. I promise you'll see it. Alexander's voice carried quiet conviction. I can't give you back the past, Sophie, but I can show up for your future, every day, for as long as you'll let me. They stood together at the window as night fell over the city, two people connected by blood and broken promises, trying to figure out if second chances were possible when the first chance had been so thoroughly destroyed. Below them, Manhattan glittered with wealth and possibility, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in hospital rooms and family lounges. But up here, 7 floors above the city's indifference, 3 people were discovering that sometimes the compass does point true. It just takes 25 years and a chance encounter to follow it home. The conversation with her mother came the next morning, after Elena had finished her breathing exercises with the respiratory therapist and was sitting up in bed looking stronger than she had in months. The color had returned to her face, and though she still needed supplemental oxygen, the desperate struggle for each breath had eased. Sophie sat in the chair beside the bed, Alexander standing near the window in his now familiar position, giving them space while remaining present. Mama, we need to talk about what happens when you're discharged, Sophie began, watching her mother's expression carefully. Dr. Morrison says 3 more days here. Then you'll need somewhere quiet to continue recovery. Somewhere without stairs, with access to medical care, where you can focus on getting well. Elena's jaw tightened. We'll figure something out. Maybe there's a ground floor apartment we can afford, or there's a house. Alexander's voice was quiet but firm. In Westchester, 25 minutes from the city. It's been sitting empty for years. I bought it during my marriage as a weekend retreat we never used. Full staff, including a nurse, quiet neighborhood, gardens for walking when you're strong enough. I'd like to offer it to you both, for as long as you need. Absolutely not. Elena's response was immediate, reflexive. I'm not moving into your house, Alexander. I'm not becoming some kept woman living off your charity while you… Mama, listen to me. Sophie leaned forward, taking her mother's hand. This isn't about charity or control. This is about you having a safe place to heal. Our apartment isn't an option anymore. You can't do 4 flights of stairs with your lungs. We can't afford rent on a ground floor place and medical expenses. And I can't take care of you properly while working double shifts just to keep us afloat. We need help, and Alexander is offering it. Can we please just consider it? Elena looked between them, her expression torn between pride and pragmatism. Sophie recognized the war playing out behind her mother's eyes. The same war she'd fought herself 3 nights ago when Alexander had first offered assistance. The desire to remain independent, fighting against the mathematical reality that independence might kill her. What are the conditions? Elena asked finally, directing the question at Alexander. Nothing comes free with people like you. What do you want in exchange? Time, Alexander said simply. Time to know my daughter. Time to understand who you both are. what you need, what kind of family we might be able to build. I'm not asking to move in with you. I'm not demanding gratitude or affection or forgiveness. I'm just asking for proximity, for the chance to be present in a way I haven't been for 25 years. And if I say no, if I refuse the house, then I'll help you find and furnish a ground floor apartment anywhere you want. I'll arrange for home health care. I'll set up a trust fund to cover your living expenses during recovery. But Elena, Alexander moved closer to the bed, his voice dropping to something more intimate. The house is better. It's designed for someone recovering from illness. The previous owner had a disabled parent living there. There's medical equipment already installed, the nurses' quarters are separate so you'll have privacy, and the grounds are beautiful. It would be good for both of you. Please consider it. Sophie watched her mother's resistance waver. Elena closed her eyes, and Sophie could almost see her running calculations, weighing pride against practicality, independence against survival, the past against the possibility of a different future. 1 month, Elena said finally, her eyes still closed. I'll try it for 1 month. If it feels wrong, if you start acting like you own us because you're housing us, if this becomes about control instead of recovery, we leave. No arguments, no guilt trips, just a clean break. Agreed? Agreed, Alexander said immediately. And Elena, thank you for trusting me this much. I know it costs you. It costs me everything, Elena said, opening her eyes to look at him directly. My pride, my independence, the story I've told myself for 25 years about not needing anyone. So don't make me regret it, Alexander. Don't prove my worst fears right. I won't. I swear to you, I won't. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. Alexander's assistant, a competent woman named Patricia, who appeared at the hospital with contracts and documents, coordinated everything. The Westchester house was aired out, restocked, and staffed. A nurse named Margaret was hired specifically to oversee Elena's care. Sophie's belongings were packed up from the Washington Heights apartment, not many, after a lifetime of poverty, and transported to the house. The lease was terminated, the utilities transferred, the small security deposit refunded. Sophie felt strange letting go of the apartment, even though she'd hated its broken elevator and peeling paint and thin walls. It had been home, the place where her mother had raised her, where they'd built a life out of nothing. Leaving it felt like closing a chapter she wasn't sure she was ready to finish. On the morning of Elena's discharge, Dr. Morrison conducted a final examination and provided detailed instructions for ongoing care. Medications, breathing exercises, activity restrictions, warning signs to watch for. He shook Elena's hand with genuine warmth. You're a fighter, Ms. Carter. You came in here in crisis and you're leaving stable and on the path to recovery. That took determination and courage. Don't lose that fighting spirit during the long work ahead. Thank you, doctor, for everything, for taking me seriously when I was just another poor patient in need of expensive care. Dr. Morrison's expression grew serious. Ms. Carter, we took you seriously because you deserved serious care. Every patient does. The fact that you needed Alexander Hunt to advocate for you in order to receive appropriate treatment is an indictment of our healthcare system, not a reflection of your worth. Remember that. The words seemed to shake something loose in Elena. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. I'll try. Alexander had arranged for private medical transport to the house, not an ambulance, but a specialized vehicle, with a nurse escort and all the equipment Elena might need during the 25-minute drive. Sophie rode with her mother while Alexander followed in his Mercedes, giving them space for the transition. The house revealed itself gradually as they drove through Westchester's tree-lined streets, neighborhoods growing progressively quieter and more affluent until they turned onto a private road and passed through iron gates. The house itself was modest by Billionaire standards, a sprawling, single-story ranch-style structure set on 2 acres of landscaped grounds. Sophie saw her mother's eyes widen as they pulled up the circular driveway. This is the house he never uses? Elena's voice carried disbelief. This is his idea of nothing ostentatious? Rich people have different scales, Mama, Sophie said, but she was equally overwhelmed. The house was beautiful, all clean lines and large windows, designed to bring the outside in. Nothing like the cramped apartment they'd left behind. Margaret was waiting at the entrance. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, wearing scrubs and radiating competent warmth. She helped Elena from the transport vehicle into a wheelchair, overriding Elena's protest that she could walk. "Miss Carter, you'll have plenty of time to prove how strong you are. Right now, let's conserve your energy for the important things." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm, and Sophie liked her immediately. Here was someone who wouldn't let Elena's stubborn pride interfere with her recovery. The house's interior was even more impressive than its exterior. Open floor plan, hardwood floors, furniture that looked expensive but comfortable, large windows overlooking gardens where late autumn flowers still bloomed. Everything was accessible, with wide doorways and no stairs. Margaret wheeled Elena down a hallway to the main suite, a large bedroom with an attached bathroom designed for someone with mobility issues. A hospital bed had been set up, along with oxygen equipment and other medical supplies. But the room felt like a bedroom, not a sick room. "This is yours for as long as you need it," Margaret explained, helping Elena transfer from the wheelchair to the bed. "I'm in the cottage out back if you need anything. There's a call button here that goes directly to my phone. Mr. Hunt had me stock your bathroom with everything you might need, but if there's anything missing, just let me know." Elena looked around the room, overwhelmed. "This is too much. All of this is too much." "It's exactly what you need," Margaret corrected gently. "Now, let's get you settled and go over your medication schedule. Sophie, Mr. Hunt mentioned you'd be staying in the guest wing, the blue room, second door on the right. Why don't you get yourself situated while I help your mother get comfortable?" Sophie hesitated, reluctant to leave her mother, but Elena waved her away. "Go, baby. I'm fine. Margaret's got me." The blue room was at the opposite end of the house, a beautiful space with its own bathroom, a queen bed with actual pillows instead of the flat lumps Sophie was used to, and windows overlooking the back garden. Her meager possessions looked lost in the spacious closet. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the magnitude of the change that had overtaken their lives in less than a week. 7 days ago, she'd been serving dinner to wealthy strangers, watching her mother die slowly and drowning in debt and exhaustion. Now she was living in a billionaire's house. Her mother was recovering under professional medical care, and she had a father who seemed determined to make up for 25 years of absence. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment to find herself back in the Washington Heights apartment with nothing changed. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Alexander stood in the hallway, still keeping his distance, still asking permission with his body language before entering her space. "Is your room all right? Patricia tried to anticipate what you might need, but if there's anything missing, it's fine. It's more than fine. It's overwhelming." Sophie gestured around the room. "I've never had this much space to myself. Never had a closet this big or a bathroom I didn't share. It's strange." Alexander leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "I know this is a lot of change all at once, and I know you're both waiting for the other shoe to drop, for me to reveal some hidden agenda or expectation. But Sophie, I want to be very clear about something. This house, the medical care, the support, none of it comes with strings. You're not obligated to have a relationship with me. Your mother isn't obligated to forgive me. If you decide after a month that you want to leave and never see me again, I'll help you do that. This isn't a trap. It's me trying to do the right thing. Finally, after 25 years of doing the wrong thing." "Why now?" The question burst out of Sophie with an intensity that surprised them both. "Why are you capable of being this person now, but you couldn't be this person then? What changed?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of hard-won self-knowledge. "I think I had to lose everything that I thought mattered before I could understand what actually mattered. My marriage failed because I couldn't connect with another human being. My father died 3 years ago, and I felt nothing but relief. I've built an empire that makes me wealthier every day, and it brings me no joy. I was hollow, Sophie, completely hollow. And then you walked up to my table with a champagne bottle and showed me your mother's tattoo, and suddenly I had a reason to be something other than hollow. I had a daughter who needed me, a woman I'd loved and destroyed who was dying because I'd abandoned her. And I couldn't let that be the end of the story. I couldn't die someday as the man who chose money over love and never tried to make it right." Sophie felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. She'd been holding herself rigid, waiting for Alexander to disappoint her. expecting him to revert to the careless 23-year-old who'd offered her mother $50,000 to end a pregnancy. But the man standing in her doorway wasn't that person anymore. He was someone who'd been broken by his own choices and was trying, with whatever tools he had available, to become someone better. "I want to go back to school," Sophie heard herself say. "Columbia, pre-law. I want to finish what I started 3 years ago when Mama got sick. But I don't want to be someone who just takes your money and gives nothing back. I need to know that accepting your help doesn't mean losing myself. Then we'll figure out how to structure it so you don't feel that way. Maybe you work for one of my companies part-time while you study. Real work, not a fake job designed to funnel you money. Maybe you tutor other students and earn your own income. Maybe you start a nonprofit to help families in situations like yours and your mother's. I don't care how we do it, Sophie. I just want you to have the chance you earned and shouldn't have had to give up." A nonprofit. The idea caught Sophie's attention, sparked something in her that had been dormant for years. For families who have to choose between education and survival, who sacrifice their futures because they can't afford health care or housing or basic security. That's perfect. Alexander's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. And I can help you set it up. Not run it. That would be your vision, your work. But I can provide seed funding, legal support, connections to people who could help. This could be something real, Sophie. Something that uses my resources to fix the kinds of problems I helped create. Before Sophie could respond, Margaret appeared in the hallway. "Sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Carter is asking for both of you. She's settled in and wants to talk." They found Elena sitting up in bed, no longer needing the wheelchair or even the supplemental oxygen for the moment. She looked exhausted but alert, her eyes moving between Sophie and Alexander with an expression Sophie couldn't quite read. "I need to say something, and I need you both to listen without interrupting." Elena's voice was stronger than it had been in years, fueled by something Sophie recognized as her mother's core strength, finally freed from the constant weight of survival. "I've spent 25 years being angry, Alexander. Angry at you for abandoning us. Angry at myself for letting you matter. Angry at the world for being so unfair to people without money or power. And that anger kept me going when nothing else could. It gave me the fire to work 3 jobs, to raise Sophie alone, to refuse help because accepting help felt like admitting defeat." She paused, taking a careful breath. "But anger is exhausting, and I'm tired. I'm so tired of being angry, of keeping score, of treating every offer of help like it's a trap. So here's what I'm proposing. We try this, all 3 of us. We try being a family, whatever that means for people who missed the first 25 years. We make mistakes, we work through them, we figure out what we can build from these broken pieces. But we do it honestly, without keeping score of who owes what to whom." "Mama," Sophie started, but Elena held up a hand. "I'm not done. Alexander, you hurt me. You broke my heart and abandoned our daughter and forced me into a life of poverty that nearly killed me. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen or that I'm over it. But I'm also not going to waste whatever years I have left punishing you for mistakes you made when you were barely older than Sophie is now. So if you're serious about being present, about being a father, and whatever we are to each other now, then I'm willing to try. But the moment you start acting like your money gives you control over our lives, the moment you try to buy us instead of knowing us, we're done. Clear?" "Crystal clear," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "Elena, I don't deserve this chance. But I swear to you, I will spend every day trying to earn it. Don't try to earn it. Just be present. That's all I ever wanted from you. Presence, not presents. The man who got this tattoo with me." She touched her wrist. "That man knew how to be present. He knew how to listen and care and see me as a person instead of a problem. I need to know if that man still exists somewhere under all the money and power." "He does." Alexander crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, the same position he'd taken that first night in the Washington Heights apartment. "Elena, I loved you. I was young and stupid and too weak to fight for that love. But it was real. And seeing you now, seeing what you became, how you raised our daughter to be strong and compassionate and brilliant despite every obstacle, I think I might still love you. Not the girl you were, but the woman you are. And I know I have no right to feel that way, no right to ask for anything beyond the chance to be Sophie's father, But I need you to know that this isn't obligation or guilt. This is me trying to find my way back to something true." Sophie watched tears stream down her mother's face, watched 25 years of armor finally crack open completely. Elena reached out and touched Alexander's face, her fingers tracing the lines that time and regret had carved there. "We were so young," Elena whispered. "We were children playing at being adults, thinking love was enough to overcome everything. And when it wasn't enough, when the real world came crashing in with its demands and its cruelty, we broke instead of bending. But maybe we get a second chance now. Maybe we're finally old enough to do this right." Alexander took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "I promise you, Elena, I will spend whatever time we have left doing it right. No more running, no more choosing money over what matters. Just us. Whatever that looks like." Sophie felt like she should leave, should give them privacy for this moment. But her mother's other hand reached out, beckoning her closer, and Sophie found herself on the opposite side of the bed, completing the triangle. 3 people bound by blood and mistakes, and the tentative hope that maybe, finally, they could become a family. Over the following weeks, they settled into an unexpected rhythm. Elena grew stronger day by day under Margaret's capable care, her breathing easier, her color better, her spirit returning. She walked the gardens every morning, Alexander often accompanying her, the two of them talking through 25 years of missed conversations. Sometimes Sophie joined them. Sometimes she gave them space, sensing they needed to rebuild whatever foundation had been destroyed so long ago. Alexander kept his promise about transparency, providing detailed accounting of every expense related to Elena's care. True to Elena's insistence, they structured it legally as a loan to be repaid, though Alexander's attorneys had included language about forgiveness and gift allowances that would make actual repayment largely symbolic. Elena seemed satisfied with this arrangement, the legal documentation giving her the sense of agency she needed to accept help without feeling owned. Sophie enrolled in Columbia's spring semester, her scholarship reinstated with a phone call from Alexander to the university president, a call that had taken 30 seconds and solved a problem Sophie had spent 3 years believing was insurmountable. She felt complicated about the ease of it, the way money could open doors that merit alone had left locked. But she was learning to separate accepting opportunities from being owned by them. The nonprofit became her passion project. With Alexander's connections and seed funding, but Sophie's vision and leadership, they established the Compass Rose Foundation, named for the tattoo that had brought them together. Its mission was simple: provide comprehensive support to families forced to choose between education and survival, between pursuing dreams and maintaining basic security. Medical assistance, housing support, education funding, childcare services, everything Sophie and Elena had needed and couldn't access during their years of struggle. Sophie interviewed every potential recipient herself, sat across tables in community centers and living rooms, listened to stories that echoed her own. She hired staff who understood poverty, not as an abstraction, but as lived experience. She built a board of directors that included people who'd climbed out of poverty themselves, who wouldn't romanticize or condescend to the people they were trying to help. 6 months after that night in Lumiere's VIP room, the foundation helped its 100th family. 6 months after Sophie's world had shattered and reformed, she stood at a podium in Columbia's Student Center, giving a presentation about systemic poverty and institutional barriers to education. In the audience sat both her parents, Elena, healthy now, no longer needing oxygen, her lungs healing slowly but steadily. Alexander present as always, his phone silenced, his attention completely focused on his daughter's words. After the presentation, they drove back to the Westchester house together, all 3 of them in Alexander's Mercedes, comfortable now in each other's presence. The awkwardness had faded, replaced by the easy shorthand of people learning to be family. They argued sometimes, especially Elena and Alexander, working through old wounds and new misunderstandings. But they worked through it together instead of running from it. That evening, after dinner cooked by Elena, who'd insisted she was healthy enough to reclaim her kitchen skills, they sat on the back patio watching the sun set over the gardens. Sophie had brought paperwork from the foundation, cases that needed review. Alexander was reading a book Elena had recommended, trying to understand her perspective on economic justice. And Elena was knitting, a hobby she'd discovered during her recovery when Margaret taught her to occupy her restless hands. "I got a letter today," Elena said, breaking the comfortable silence. From the social worker at the free clinic in Washington Heights. She wanted to know how I was doing, said she'd been worried about me after I stopped coming in. Are you going to write back? Sophie asked. I already did. Told her about my recovery, about the foundation, about everything that's changed, and I asked if she knew families who might need our help. She sent back a list of 27 people who are where I was 6 months ago, sick, poor, drowning, and running out of time. Elena set down her knitting and looked at Alexander. We could help them. The foundation could help them. Then we will, Alexander said simply. All of them. Whatever they need. It won't fix the system, Elena continued. One foundation, even with your billions behind it, can't fix a healthcare system designed to extract wealth from the sick, an economy that punishes poverty, an education system that gates opportunity behind money. We're putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. Maybe, Sophie said, but Band-Aids keep people alive long enough to fight for real change. Every family we help is a family that gets to keep existing, keep trying, keep dreaming. That matters, Mama. It has to matter. It does matter. Elena's voice was soft. I just wish we lived in a world where it wasn't necessary, where people didn't need a billionaire's guilty conscience to access basic human dignity. Alexander set down his book. You're right. The system is broken, and my fortune is built partly on that broken system. But Elena, maybe the best thing I can do with that fortune is use it to help people escape the same traps that nearly killed you. Not as charity, not as absolution, but as partial repayment for the ways I've benefited from other people's suffering. The conversation continued as darkness fell, the three of them wrestling with questions too big for any single family to solve. But they were doing it together now, using their combined perspectives. Elena's lived experience of poverty, Alexander's understanding of how power and wealth operated, Sophie's generation's urgency for systemic change, to build something that might actually help. Later that night, Sophie found her mother standing alone in the garden, looking up at the stars. She joined her, slipping her arm through Elena's, both of them comfortable in the silence. Are you happy, Mama? Sophie asked finally. Elena considered the question carefully. I'm recovering, not just my lungs, but everything. All the parts of me that shut down when I had to be strong alone. I'm remembering how to trust, how to accept help, how to imagine a future that isn't just survival. Is that happiness? I don't know, but it's something better than I've had in 25 years. Do you think, Sophie hesitated, unsure if she should ask, do you think you and Alexander might, I don't know, Elena said, but her voice was gentle. We're taking it slow, remembering who we used to be to each other, discovering who we are now. He's not the boy I fell in love with, and I'm not the girl he abandoned. We're different people, shaped by everything that happened between then and now. But Sophie, when he touches his tattoo and looks at mine, when we're walking in the garden and he takes my hand like it's the most natural thing in the world, I feel something I thought I'd buried forever. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. Or just peace. Peace with the past. Peace with the present. Peace with the fact that broken things can sometimes be repaired, even if they're never the same as they were before. I'm glad, Sophie said. For both of you. You deserve peace. So do you, baby. You gave up so much to take care of me. I need you to know that you're free now. Free to build your own life, chase your own dreams, be your own person. You don't owe me anything. I know, Mama, but here's the thing. I don't want to be free of you. I want to be free with you. Building the foundation together, figuring out this weird family thing with Alexander, creating something meaningful from all the pain we've been through. That's not obligation. That's choice. And I choose this. I choose us. Elena pulled Sophie into a fierce hug, and they stood like that for a long moment under the stars. When they finally pulled apart, Sophie saw tears on her mother's face, but they were the good kind, the healing kind, the kind that washed away old wounds instead of opening new ones. Inside the house, Alexander was making tea in the kitchen, moving around the space with comfortable familiarity now. He'd sold his Manhattan penthouse, sold the empty mansion he'd rattled around in alone for years. This house, the place that was supposed to be temporary, a month-long trial, had become home for all three of them. They gathered around the kitchen table with their tea, comfortable in their pajamas and robes, looking nothing like the broken, desperate people who'd met in a hospital room 6 months ago. Alexander reached across the table and took Elena's hand. Elena squeezed back, then reached for Sophie with her other hand, and Sophie completed the circle, linking all three of them together. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, "about the tattoos, about what they were supposed to mean and what they actually came to mean, and I want to propose something." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the compass rose. Elena did the same, and for the first time, Sophie saw them side by side, identical markings on two people who'd been torn apart and somehow found their way back. "I'd like us to add something to them," Alexander continued. "A date. The day we became a family again. Not the day in the hospital or the day you moved into this house, but today. The day when we all chose this, when we stopped being people thrown together by crisis and became people who actively chose to build something together." "You want to mark today?" Elena's voice was thoughtful. "To commemorate our second beginning? I want to acknowledge that sometimes the compass does point true, even if it takes 25 years to follow it. And I want Sophie," he looked at his daughter, "I want you to have one too, if you want it. Not to match ours, but your own design. Something that represents who you are, what you've survived, what you're building." Sophie thought about it, imagining a compass rose on her own wrist. But Alexander was right. She needed something different, something that was hers alone while still connecting to their shared story. And suddenly, she knew exactly what she wanted. "Not a compass rose," she said slowly. "A lighthouse. Because that's what Mama was for me my whole life, a light in the darkness, guiding me safely, even when she was drowning herself. And that's what the foundation is trying to be for other families. Not giving them directions, but giving them light so they can find their own way." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "A lighthouse! Oh, Sophie, that's perfect!" They made an appointment for the following week, all three of them. A reputable artist who specialized in meaningful work, not flash designs. The day they went, Sophie sat between her parents, watching as the artist carefully added a small date beneath their compass roses, a marker of their second chance. Then she held her mother's hand while her own design took shape on her wrist, a lighthouse standing firm against stylized waves, its light beaming out into darkness. The pain of the needle was sharp but bearable, and Sophie found herself thinking about all the pain they'd endured to get to this moment. Her mother's years of exhausting work and untreated illness, Alexander's decades of hollow success and crushing regret, her own sacrificed education and constant fear of losing the one parent she'd known. All that pain had led them here, to this tattoo shop, to these permanent marks they were choosing to carry as symbols of survival and recovery and hope. When it was done, when all three of them wore their marked wrists, they stood together looking in the mirror. Three people who shouldn't have fit together but somehow did. A family built not on the fantasy of perfection, but on the reality of showing up, doing the work, and choosing each other day after day after day. "We're going to make mistakes," Elena said, studying their reflections. "We're going to hurt each other, disappoint each other, struggle to figure out how to be family when we missed so much time. This isn't a fairy tale ending." "No," Alexander agreed, "but it's a real ending. And more importantly, it's a real beginning. One where we face whatever comes next together instead of alone." Sophie looked at her lighthouse tattoo, then at her parents' compass roses, then at the three faces reflected back at her, older now, marked by struggle, but no longer broken. Just healing, just human, just trying. "Together," she said. "I like the sound of that." They left the tattoo shop and drove back to Westchester, to the house that had become home, to the life they were building from the pieces of what had been destroyed. The Compass Rose Foundation continued its work, helping hundreds and then thousands of families escape the poverty traps that had nearly killed Elena. Sophie finished her degree and went on to law school, using her education to fight for systemic change while the foundation provided immediate relief. Elena recovered fully, her lungs healing to the point where she could breathe freely again, could sing again, could reclaim the joy that poverty and illness had stolen. And Alexander showed up, every day, in big ways and small. He attended Sophie's law school graduation, tears streaming down his face as she walked across the stage. He sat with Elena during her pulmonary rehabilitation sessions, holding her hand through the difficult breathing exercises. He used his wealth and connections not to control, but to open doors, to amplify voices that money usually silenced, to prove that privilege could be wielded for justice instead of just accumulation. They never became the family they might have been if Alexander hadn't run away 25 years ago. That alternate timeline was lost forever, a ghost that haunted them less as time passed. Instead, they became the family they actually were, imperfect, complicated, bound together by blood and choice and the hard work of showing up for each other even when it was difficult. On the first anniversary of that night in Lumiere, they held a fundraiser for the foundation. Sophie gave a speech about her mother's courage, about the invisible workers who keep the world running while slowly dying from the strain. Alexander announced a $1 billion endowment to ensure the foundation's work would continue for generations. And Elena, standing beside them both, shared her story publicly for the first time. Not as a sob story or a redemption narrative, but as a testimony to the strength it takes to survive systems designed to break you. I spent 25 years angry, Elena told the crowd of donors and foundation recipients and journalists. Angry at the man who abandoned me, angry at the world that punished me for being poor, angry at myself for all the things I couldn't provide my daughter. And that anger kept me alive when nothing else could. But anger isn't a permanent fuel. Eventually it burns out, leaving you hollow. What sustains us, what sustains me, is love. Love for my daughter who sacrificed her future for mine. Love for the man who came back too late and is spending every day trying to make up for lost time. Love for the families we're helping, the communities we're rebuilding, the world we're trying to change one lighthouse beam at a time. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sophie barely heard it. She was watching her parents, watching them look at each other with eyes that held recognition and regret and something that looked a lot like love. They weren't the star-crossed college sweethearts who'd gotten matching tattoos one perfect summer. They were two middle-aged people who'd been broken by their choices and rebuilt by their determination to do better. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found their way back to each other. After the fundraiser, after the crowds had dispersed and the last donor had been thanked, the three of them returned to their home. Sophie found her parents sitting on the back patio, holding hands, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She joined them, settling into her own chair, comfortable in the silence. "Do you think we made it?" Sophie asked. "Do you think we're actually okay now?" "I think we're better than okay," Elena said. "I think we're real. Real families struggle and fight and work through hard things together. Real families make mistakes and apologize and try again. Real families aren't perfect, they're just present. And we're present now, all three of us. That's more than I ever thought we'd have." Alexander lifted Elena's hand to his lips, kissing the compass rose tattoo that had brought them back together. 25 years ago, I told you this tattoo meant we'd always find our way back to each other. I broke that promise almost immediately, but Elena, his voice caught. We found our way back anyway. Not because of the tattoo, but because Sophie saw it and was brave enough to speak up, because you were strong enough to survive long enough for us to get a second chance, because sometimes the universe gives you another shot at getting it right. Or because sometimes, Sophie added, touching her lighthouse tattoo, people are strong enough to save themselves and then generous enough to let other people join them in the life they've built. That's what you did, Mama. You saved yourself. You saved me. And then you let Alexander in, not because you needed him to survive, but because you chose to give him a chance to be part of something good. Elena looked at her daughter, pride and love written across her face. You're going to change the world, Sophie. Not because you're a hunt now, not because you have access to money and power, but because you know what it costs to survive when the world doesn't care if you live or die. You're going to fight for people like us, people the system throws away. And you're not going to let them be invisible anymore. We're going to fight for them, Sophie corrected. All of us. Together. Because that's what families do. They show up for each other and then they show up for their communities. And eventually they change the world just by refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable. They sat together as night deepened around them, three people who'd been broken and scattered and somehow reassembled into something stronger than they'd been before. The compass rose had pointed true after 25 years of wandering. The lighthouse had guided them safely through the darkness. And together, marked with their tattoos and their scars and their hard-won wisdom, they were building something that would outlast them all. A foundation, a family, a future where poverty and illness didn't mean death sentences, where single mothers didn't have to work themselves into graves to feed their children, where dreams deferred didn't become dreams destroyed. They couldn't fix everything. They couldn't save everyone. But they could start, one family at a time, one lighthouse beam at a time, one compass point at a time. And that, finally, was enough.